My name is Hannah, 33 years old, and exactly 8 days after moving into our dream home, the previous owner called my private office line. Her voice was shaking. She told me she had forgotten to disconnect a hidden security camera in the air vent of my new home office. She said she saw my husband and his mother doing something unthinkable. She whispered, "Do not tell him, come alone." I braced myself for footage of an affair, but what I saw on that screen was a betrayal so calculated and malicious, it instantly turned my marriage into a crime scene. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to outsmart the very people who were supposed to protect you. I was in the middle of tracking $3 million of missing corporate assets for a high-profile client. As a forensic auditor, my entire life revolves around finding the truth hidden beneath complex layers of financial deceit. My desk was covered in bank statements and ledger printouts when my private line rang. It was Sylvia, the 68-year-old widow who had just sold us our beautiful Victorian home in the historic district. We had barely unpacked our moving boxes. I expected her to be calling about a forwarded package or a misplaced set of spare keys. Instead, her voice was a frantic, hushed whisper. "Hannah, you need to leave work right now and come to my condo. I forgot to disable a hidden security camera I had installed in the office vent years ago. I just saw your husband and his mother. Do not tell him. Come alone." My stomach plummeted. Bradley, my charming, successful real estate broker husband, was supposed to be showing a commercial property downtown. His mother, Patricia, a woman who treated me like the dirt stuck to the bottom of her designer shoes, was supposed to be at a charity luncheon. I grabbed my car keys, my mind racing with terrifying images of another woman in my house violating my sacred workspace. I arrived at Sylvia's new condo 20 minutes later, my hands trembling as she ushered me inside and quickly locked the deadbolt. She did not say a single word. She just pointed a shaking finger to her laptop on the dining table. I braced myself for infidelity. I fully expected to see Bradley with some young real estate assistant. I was prepared for heartbreak. I was absolutely not prepared for a federal crime. On the high-definition screen, the camera angle pointed directly down into my new home office. Bradley and Patricia were not having a casual visit. They were violently prying up the original oak floorboards using a heavy steel crowbar. My husband, the man who had kissed me goodbye that morning with sweet promises of a romantic weekend, was sweating as he hauled heavy black duffel bags from the hallway into my office. Patricia stood over him, clutching her signature crocodile leather purse, her face twisted in an ugly, impatient sneer. Bradley unzipped the massive bags. Thick stacks of bundled illicit cash spilled out onto the floor. Millions of dollars. Beside the cash, he tossed in several thick-sealed legal folders. The hidden camera picked up the audio perfectly. "Careful with those LLC documents," Patricia snapped, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at the folders. "Everything is in her name. Every single shell company, every offshore transfer, every forged signature. Make sure it is buried deep enough so it looks like she was the one hiding it all along." I stopped breathing. As a forensic auditor, I knew exactly what I was looking at. This was money laundering on a massive, terrifying scale, and my own family was actively framing me for it. Bradley grunted as he shoved the last bag violently under the subfloor. "Are you sure this is going to work, Mom? If the feds trace this back to my firm, we are completely ruined." Patricia let out a harsh, mocking laugh that echoed through the laptop speakers. "Your firm is already bankrupt, Bradley. We are 8 million in the hole. This is the only way out. Once the feds get the anonymous tip and find this cartel money in her office, she will get 20 years in federal prison. Because she is a forensic auditor, no judge will ever believe she did not orchestrate the whole thing herself. And since you two are legally married, her trust fund automatically transfers to your guardianship the moment she is incarcerated." My blood ran ice cold. My trust fund. My father had passed away when I was 18, leaving me a substantial estate carefully locked in a trust that would become fully accessible on my 35th birthday. I had never touched a dime of it, insisting on paying my own way through college and building my career from scratch. Patricia had always mocked my job constantly, calling me a lowly number cruncher who dragged down her son's high society image. Now it was horrifyingly clear. They had never loved me. They married me for my father's money, and they were willing to destroy my life to pay off their massive hidden debts. "Hurry up before the little calculator comes home," Patricia sneered on the video, checking her diamond watch. "Nail those boards back down perfectly. The anonymous tip goes to the FBI next Friday. We will finally be rid of her." Sylvia paused the video, her eyes wide with absolute terror. She asked if I wanted her to call the police right now. I stared at the frozen image of my husband's face on the screen. The man I slept next to every night was planning to send me to a federal penitentiary. Pure panic urged me to run to scream to call the authorities immediately. But my professional training took over. Forensic auditing is about ultimate patience. It is about gathering airtight, undeniable proof before making a single move. If I called the police now, Bradley and Patricia would simply claim I planted the money myself. I needed to trap them in their own web. I needed their financial records, their wire transfers, and absolute proof of their conspiracy. I asked Sylvia to securely back up the footage to my encrypted work drive and to completely wipe her own system. She hugged me tightly, promising absolute silence. The drive back to my house felt like a nightmare simulation. I was stepping back into a war zone, completely unarmed, sharing a roof with two ruthless predators. I pulled into our driveway, gripping the steering wheel, until my knuckles turned white, forcing my breathing to slow down. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror, carefully wiping away any trace of the devastation that was tearing me apart inside. I unlocked the front door. The house smelled faintly of expensive cologne and lemon wood polish. Bradley walked out of the kitchen looking as handsome and relaxed as the day I met him. He handed me a glass of poured red wine, flashing his signature flawless smile. "Rough day at work, babe?" he asked, leaning in to kiss my forehead. "Mom dropped by earlier to help organize your new office. We wanted to surprise you so you could just relax tonight." I looked at the man who was actively planning my demise. I took the glass of wine from his hand, mirroring his perfect smile, without missing a single beat. "Thank you," I said, my voice steady and sweet. "I cannot wait to see what you two did to my office." 2 days later, the polished mahogany dining table in my new home was set for 5. Sunday family dinner was a mandatory tradition Bradley insisted we host to break in the new house. I had spent the entire weekend moving through the rooms like a ghost, playing the role of the blissfully ignorant wife, while mentally logging every square inch of the floorboards in my home office. The doorbell chimed right at 6. Patricia swept into the foyer wearing a cashmere wrap that cost more than my first car. Close behind her was Bradley's sister Megan, looking as exhausted and diminished as she always did around her mother. Trailing them was Terrence. Terrence was Megan's husband and a senior building inspector for the city. He was a sharp, imposing man who always seemed to be biting his tongue in Patricia's presence. I handed him a glass of scotch, and we exchanged a brief, knowing glance. We were the two outsiders in this family, the ones who always had to earn our seats at the table. We gathered around the dining room. Bradley took his place at the head of the table, carving the roast beef with the practiced elegance of a man who believed he owned the world. "This house is truly a triumph, Bradley," Patricia announced, taking a delicate sip of her expensive Cabernet. "You have outdone yourself, darling. The historic neighborhood, the square footage, it is exactly what a top-tier real estate broker deserves." Megan nodded, keeping her eyes on her plate. "It really is a beautiful home, Brad." Patricia turned her icy gaze to me, her smile dripping with absolute condescension. "You are incredibly lucky, Hannah. A standard number cruncher salary could never afford a historic property like this. Bradley practically bought this place single-handedly. It is so nice that he lets you have that little room downstairs for your calculators and your spreadsheets." I did not flinch. I cut a piece of my steak, chewing it slowly as the room waited for my usual polite deflection. But the woman who used to absorb her daily insults had died on Friday afternoon in Sylvia's condo. "Actually, Patricia," I said, my voice bright and conversational, "you would be amazed at what forensic accounting pays these days. Corporate fraud is booming right now. In fact, my firm is currently tracking a massive embezzlement case. It is absolutely fascinating how arrogant criminals try to hide their stolen assets." Bradley froze his carving knife, hovering rigidly above the meat. Patricia waved a dismissive hand with a scoff. I am sure tracking stolen office supplies is riveting, dear, but we are talking about real wealth. Oh, it is real wealth. I continued, leaning forward and resting my elbows on the table, making direct eye contact with my husband. This specific syndicate uses shell LLCs, registered under stolen identities. They siphon illicit cash through failing real estate brokerages. Then they physically hide the bundled currency in structural blind spots, hoping to frame an oblivious proxy when the feds finally raid the property. Bradley choked violently. A piece of meat caught in his throat, and he grabbed his wine glass, coughing and sputtering as red wine sloshed over the rim and stained the pristine white tablecloth like fresh blood. Brad, honey, are you okay? Megan asked, half rising from her chair in panic. He pounded his chest. His face flushed a deep crimson, his eyes wide and terrified as they locked onto mine. I am fine, he wheezed, wiping his mouth with a linen napkin. Just went down the wrong pipe. I smiled sweetly at my husband, pushing the gravy boat toward him. You have to be careful, Bradley. Sometimes people bite off way more than they can chew. It can be fatal. Terrence watched the entire exchange closely. His eyes darted from Bradley's panicked face to my perfectly calm demeanor. As a building inspector, he was trained to spot structural weaknesses and hidden faults. Right now, he was watching the foundation of his brother-in-law's fake life crack wide open. Patricia, clearly annoyed that the spotlight had shifted from her son's supposed greatness, decided to redirect her venom. The main course was cleared, and I brought out a lemon tart for dessert. As I served the slices, Patricia turned her attention to Terrence. So Terrence, Patricia began, her tone laced with that familiar sugary poison. Are you still working for the city? I was talking to the zoning commissioner at the country club last week. He mentioned they are doing a huge diversity push for middle management. It is so wonderful how the city lowers its testing standards to give people from your background a chance to wear a suit. The dining room went dead silent. Megan shrank further into her chair, looking miserable, but completely unwilling to defend her husband against her mother. I watched Terrence. His jaw tightened so hard I could see a muscle jumping near his ear. His knuckles turned white as he gripped his dessert fork, staring directly at his slice of tart. He was a brilliant structural engineer who had scored in the top 1% of his state exams, but to Patricia he would always be an affirmative action charity case simply because he was a black man from a working-class neighborhood. He took a slow, deliberate breath, choosing silence to keep the peace for his wife. He placed the fork down without taking a single bite. It is getting late, Terrence said, his voice dangerously low and tightly controlled. Megan, we need to relieve the babysitter. They stood to leave. Patricia offered a fake pout. Leaving before coffee? Well, I suppose city workers do have to wake up very early to beat the public transit traffic. Bradley stood up to walk his mother to her car, leaving me alone in the foyer with Terrence and Megan. While Megan went to the powder room to grab her coat, Terrence stepped out onto the dark front porch, pulling his car keys from his pocket. I followed him out, letting the heavy mahogany door click shut behind me. The night air was cool and crisp. Terrence walked toward his sedan, his posture rigid with suppressed rage. Terrence, I called out softly. He stopped and turned around by his car door. Look, Hannah, he said, rubbing the back of his neck. Do not apologize for her. I am used to it. I just cannot be in that house for another second tonight. I am not apologizing for her, I said, closing the distance between us until I was standing right in front of him. I am giving you a chance to tear her world apart. Terrence furrowed his brow, stepping away from the car. What are you talking about? I glanced over my shoulder, ensuring the front door was still shut tight. I looked back at him, my voice dropping to an urgent, sharp whisper. I need a city building inspector right now. Your mother-in-law and Bradley are hiding millions in federal cartel crimes under the floorboards of my office. They are planning to frame me for it. Terrence froze. The crickets chirping in the manicured hedges suddenly sounded deafening. He stared at me, his dark eyes searching my face for any sign of a joke or a hysterical break. He found neither. I pulled my phone from my coat pocket. I tapped the screen and held it up between us in the cold night air. The brightness illuminated his sharp jawline as he squinted at the short video clip. The high-definition footage played silently. Bradley was grunting as he swung the heavy steel crowbar. Patricia stood over him, clutching her designer bag, her mouth moving in rapid commands as thick bricks of cash disappeared into the dark gap. "Play it again," Terrence ordered, his voice dropping an octave. I tapped replay. He leaned in closer. He did not look at the money or the forged legal folders. His eyes tracked the exposed wooden beams, the angle of the pry bar, the depth of the shadows beneath the ripped floorboards. He was no longer a reluctant dinner guest. He was the senior building inspector for the city, assessing a critical structural anomaly. "That is not just a gap between the joists," Terrence muttered, pointing a blunt finger at the screen. "Look at the cross bracing, Hannah. That specific floorboard sits directly over the original gravity heating system from the 1920s. It is an old, sealed ventilation shaft." I looked at the screen and back at him. "Meaning what exactly?" "Meaning it drops straight down into a subterranean void," Terrence said, his tone grim and absolute. "A standard subfloor cavity can hold maybe a few shoeboxes of valuables. That decommissioned shaft goes down 2 stories into a blocked-off cellar section. It is a massive structural blind spot. You could hide $50 million in cash down there, and a standard police search would never tap the walls deep enough to find it." A cold shiver ran down my spine that had nothing to do with the night air. "Patricia said on the tape that the money belongs to a cartel. She said they are calling in an anonymous tip to the FBI to raid the house and find it all in my name." Terrence shoved his hands deep into his pockets, pacing a tight circle on the driveway asphalt. "If Bradley is packing illicit cash into a dead ventilation shaft, he is operating a high-level federal drop site. This is not a tax evasion scheme, Hannah. This is organized crime. You are sleeping in a house wired for a federal raid. We need to act fast," I said, keeping my voice razor thin. "I need the original blueprints for this property. I need to know exactly where that shaft leads and where the property lines officially end. If I go down to the city archives, they will log my name. Bradley has alerts on everything I do. But you have unrestricted access." Terrence stopped pacing. He looked back at the glowing windows of the dining room. Inside those walls, his wife was likely cleaning up the dishes while her mother picked apart her life choices. Patricia had spent the entire evening humiliating me professionally and degrading him racially. She thought she was untouchable because of her zip code and her bank account. "If I pull those records and they trace it back to me," Terrence said, measuring the risk, "I lose my pension. I lose my license. I could face obstruction charges if the feds are already building a case." "If you do not pull them," I countered, stepping into his line of sight, "I go to federal prison for 20 years. Bradley drains my trust fund. And Patricia will spend the rest of her life making sure Megan feels worthless while treating you like the hired help. They are not just destroying me, Terrence. They are using this fake wealth to control all of us." A heavy silence fell over the driveway. The distant sound of highway traffic hummed in the background. Terrence looked at me with a hardened, fierce clarity. He held out his hand. "I will have the municipal blueprints pulled by tomorrow morning," he said, his voice steady and resolute. "We are going to rip their entire foundation apart." I reached out to shake his hand, solidifying the pact. We were the targets they severely underestimated, the brilliant building inspector they mocked, and the forensic auditor they thought they could frame. Before our hands could meet, the heavy brass handle of the front door clicked loudly. We sprang apart instantly. A wide beam of yellow porch light spilled across the dark driveway, catching us dead center. The heavy wooden door swung open, and Bradley stepped out onto the porch. He was silhouetted against the light, his broad shoulders filling the frame. His hands were planted firmly on his hips, and his posture was rigid with sudden suspicion. "What are you two whispering about out here?" Bradley demanded, his voice carrying a sharp, accusatory edge that shattered the quiet night. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. One wrong look, one stuttered word, and he would know. He would panic and accelerate the entire frame job. I did not freeze. I did not blink. I spun around with a bright, flawless smile and walked straight up the porch steps toward my husband. "Nothing secretive at all, babe," I said smoothly, wrapping my arms around his neck and planting a soft, sweet kiss on his cheek. Terrence was just giving me some incredibly boring advice on treating the limestone foundation for termites. I noticed some dust near the basement stairs and wanted a professional opinion before we call an exterminator. Bradley relaxed instantly. The tension drained from his shoulders and his arrogant smirk returned. He wrapped an arm around my waist, pulling me against him. I told you, the inspector said the foundation was rock solid when I bought the place. Bradley chuckled, looking over my head at Terrence with a dismissive glint in his eye. Do not bore my wife to death out here, Terrence. We have a housewarming party to plan. Terrence offered a tight, polite smile, tapping his car keys against his palm. Just looking out for the property value, Brad. Have a good night, Hannah. As Terrence climbed into his car and the engine roared to life, I leaned my head against Bradley's chest, playing the part of the exhausted, trusting wife. I listened to the steady beat of his heart, entirely aware that by Friday night I was going to tear his entire world to the ground. We went back inside. Bradley locked the deadbolt and turned off the porch light, completely satisfied with his own perceived dominance. He practically hummed a tune as he walked up the stairs. I followed him, playing the role of the docile wife, brushing my teeth next to him in the master bathroom and crawling into our expensive king bed. I lay perfectly still in the dark. I counted his breaths. I waited for the exact moment his breathing shifted into the deep, rhythmic snore he always fell into after a heavy Sunday dinner and a large glass of wine. At exactly 3 in the morning, I pushed the heavy duvet off my shoulders. The hardwood floor was freezing against my bare feet, but I barely registered the chill. I slipped past Bradley's sleeping form and crept down the hallway to his private study. He always left his encrypted iPad locked in the bottom drawer of his mahogany desk. He thought a complex alphanumeric passcode and a biometric facial scan made him untouchable. He clearly forgot who he married. I pulled a specialized forensic decryption flash drive from my pocket. It was a custom tool my accounting firm used to bypass corporate firewalls during federal embezzlement investigations. I plugged it into the charging port of his iPad and booted up my bypass software. The screen flared a harsh white in the pitch-black room. Lines of code cascaded down the glass surface. 3 minutes later, the biometric lock failed. I was in. I did not bother looking at his photos or his messages. I went straight for the hidden drive partitions. Bradley always kept a shadow ledger. Every corrupt broker does. I opened a hidden folder labeled Vanguard Holdings, and the sheer scale of the financial rot hit me like a physical blow. Bradley and Patricia were not just dealing with a few bad real estate investments. Vanguard Realty was a hollow shell. They were $8 million in debt to a shadow syndicate operating out of Miami. The ledgers showed catastrophic losses on commercial properties masked by high-interest loans from people who broke legs and threatened lives when they did not get paid. My husband was drowning in cartel debt, and his mother was the co-signer on every single toxic loan. But the $8 million debt was not the most horrifying discovery. I opened a subfolder titled Offshore Restructuring. My heart slammed against my ribs as I scrolled through PDF scans of state registration documents. There were 5 newly incorporated limited liability companies: Horizon Ventures, Crestview Capital, Apex Financial. Every single one of them was registered in Delaware, and every single one of them listed me as the sole owner and primary shareholder. I stared at the glowing screen, my vision blurring with rage. Bradley had stolen my social security number. He had used copies of my driver's license and forged my signature on dozens of federal tax forms. Suddenly, a memory hit me like a freight train. 2 months ago, he had brought home a stack of life insurance paperwork. He had poured me a glass of wine, rubbed my shoulders, and told me he just wanted to make sure we were always protected. I had signed a dozen pages without reading the fine print, completely trusting the man I married. He had slipped the LLC registration documents right into that stack, the ultimate financial gaslighting. He used my love and trust as a weapon to forge my execution warrant. He had systematically built a criminal financial empire entirely in my name. The illicit cash currently sitting under the floorboards of my home office was going to be directly tied to these 5 shell companies. When the authorities traced the serial numbers and the corporate registrations, they would not find Bradley. They would find me. He had weaponized my pristine reputation as a forensic auditor. He knew the FBI would assume I used my insider knowledge of financial systems to run a money laundering ring right under my husband's nose. Patricia's voice echoed in my head from the hidden camera footage. She will get 20 years. I pressed my hand over my mouth to stop myself from screaming. The financial abuse was so absolute, so meticulously planned that it took my breath away. He was going to feed me to the federal government to wipe his own slate clean. I dug deeper, fueled by a terrifying adrenaline. If they were setting me up to take the fall for $8 million, they needed a clear exit strategy. I pulled up his linked banking applications, bypassing the secondary passwords with my firm's decryption key. I needed to see the timeline. I needed to know exactly when the trap was going to snap shut. I found it in the outbox of his secure messaging application. It was an automated wire transfer request, scheduled through a private offshore banking portal. The transfer was set for this exact coming Friday at 8 in the evening, the exact time and date of our massive housewarming party. The exact moment the FBI would receive the anonymous tip from Patricia and kick down my front door. I clicked on the transfer details, and the final piece of his betrayal clicked into place. He was not just sending the cartel cash to a secure location. The source account for the wire transfer was my personal retirement portfolio. He had secretly accessed my accounts and was currently liquidating every mutual fund and bond I had built over the last decade of my career. He had consolidated my entire life savings into a single holding account. On Friday night at 8 o'clock, an automated script would wire my entire net worth directly into a numbered account in the Cayman Islands. Bradley was going to stand in our living room clinking champagne glasses with high society guests. He would watch the FBI raid my office and drag me out in handcuffs. He would play the devastated, shocked husband. And while I was sitting in a federal holding cell, stripped of my freedom and my reputation, he would be boarding a flight to the Caymans with my money to live out his days in luxury. I safely ejected my flash drive and wiped the access logs from his iPad. I locked the device and placed it exactly where I found it in the bottom drawer of his desk. I walked back up the stairs and slipped under the covers next to the man who was planning my destruction. I did not sleep a single wink. I just stared at the ceiling, calculating my counterattack. The next 48 hours were an exercise in supreme psychological warfare. I went through the motions of my daily routine, moving around Bradley with the practiced ease of a completely oblivious wife. I ironed his shirts. I smiled over our morning coffee. I listened to him talk about the guest list for Friday's housewarming party. Underneath the serene mask, my mind was running complex risk assessments, anticipating every possible move he and his mother might make before the trap snapped shut. By Wednesday afternoon, the sheer adrenaline of my double life was catching up with me. I was sitting at my desk in my home office directly above the hidden cache of cartel cash, pretending to review quarterly tax filings for a client. In reality, I was communicating through an encrypted channel with Terrence. He had successfully pulled the city blueprints. The ventilation shaft did exactly what we suspected. It plummeted straight down into an unregistered subterranean cellar. We were formulating a plan to access it from the exterior retaining wall when the front doorbell echoed through the house. I glanced at the security monitor on my desk. Patricia was standing on my front porch holding a woven wicker basket from an overpriced artisanal bakery downtown. She was wearing a perfectly tailored cream suit and a look of manufactured maternal concern. I took a slow, stabilizing breath, smoothed my blouse, and went to open the door. "Hannah, darling." Patricia cooed, stepping into the foyer without waiting for an invitation. She set the heavy basket on the entryway console. "You looked so dreadfully pale and exhausted at dinner on Sunday. Bradley mentioned you have been working yourself into the ground. I brought us some organic chicken salads and a special blend of chamomile and lavender tea to calm your nerves." My internal alarms blared. Patricia had never once brought me lunch. She despised my career and viewed my home office as a monument to my lack of social grace. Her sudden domestic performance meant the syndicate's timeline was accelerating, and she needed to lay the groundwork for my impending downfall. "That is incredibly thoughtful of you, Patricia," I said, keeping my voice bright and utterly vacant. "Come into the office. I can take a break." We moved into the workspace. I took my seat in my ergonomic desk chair while she settled into the leather guest chair opposite me. She meticulously unpacked the salads and poured the hot tea from a sleek thermos into two identical ceramic mugs. "Bradley is deeply worried about you, Hannah," Patricia said, her voice dripping with artificial sympathy as she arranged the napkins. "He says you have been wandering the house at night. He mentioned you seem paranoid lately. It is a tragedy what corporate stress can do to a young woman's mind. You are becoming erratic, dear. It is starting to affect your marriage." I stared at her, letting her words echo in the quiet room. It was a masterclass in gaslighting. She was planting the seeds of my mental instability. When the FBI raided the house on Friday night and found me screaming about a setup, my own mother-in-law would be able to testify that I had been suffering a severe psychotic break. She would tell the police I was a paranoid workaholic who had completely lost her grip on reality. "I am just a little tired," I replied, rubbing my temples to play into her narrative. The numbers start to blur together after a while. I turned my chair slightly to the left, reaching for a stack of financial reports on the edge of my desk. I have a dual monitor set up for my auditing software. The left screen was active, displaying complex spreadsheets. The right screen was asleep, an expanse of solid black glass positioned at the perfect angle to reflect the guest chair behind me. As I reached for the folders, I kept my eyes locked on the dark reflection of the sleeping monitor. Patricia thought I was completely distracted by the paperwork. In the reflection, I saw her swift, practiced movements. She reached into the pocket of her cream blazer and pulled out a small glass vial. With a flick of her thumb, she popped the cork and dumped a generous amount of crushed white powder directly into my steaming mug of chamomile tea. She stirred it rapidly with a silver spoon and slipped the empty vial back into her pocket in under 3 seconds. Heavy sedatives. She wanted me groggy, confused, and physically stumbling when Bradley came home from work. She needed me to look like a woman who was actively losing her mind. I needed to switch those mugs. I grabbed the stack of heavy auditing ledgers and intentionally clipped the edge of my desk. The entire stack toppled over. Hundreds of pages cascaded onto the hardwood floor, scattering across the rug and sliding under the furniture. "Oh my goodness," I gasped, leaping out of my chair with exaggerated clumsiness. "I am so sorry, Patricia. I am just so clumsy today. These files are highly confidential. I cannot lose them." Patricia let out a loud, irritated sigh, standing up to brush a stray paper from her pristine skirt. "Really, Hannah, you are a mess. Let me help you gather these before you ruin something." She bent down near the bookshelf, her back completely turned to the desk. I did not hesitate. I moved with absolute silent precision, reaching across the desk and swapping the position of our identical ceramic mugs. I smoothed my expression, grabbing a handful of papers from the floor before she turned around. We placed the stacks back on the desk. Patricia sat down, brushing her hands together. "Drink your tea, darling," she urged, gesturing to the spiked mug now sitting directly in front of her. "It will help clear your head. You desperately need to relax." I picked up the safe mug, holding it with both hands to warm my fingers. "You are right, Patricia. A good cup of tea is exactly what I need." I took a long, slow sip. I maintained unwavering eye contact with her over the rim of the mug. Patricia smiled a cold, victorious smirk and lifted her own mug. She took 3 large gulps of the hot liquid, setting it back down with a satisfied sigh. "So, tell me about the caterers for Friday night," I asked, leaning back in my chair and crossing my legs. "I want to make sure the menu is absolutely perfect for Bradley's partners." Patricia opened her mouth to speak, but the words faltered on her tongue. The sedative was industrial grade. It hit her system with the force of a wrecking ball. She blinked rapidly, shaking her head as if trying to clear a sudden thick fog. "The caterers are—" She started her speech, instantly slurring. "The caviar needs to be kept on ice. Bradley said you were not capable of handling the menu." Her eyelids drooped heavily. She gripped the armrests of the chair, her knuckles turning white as she tried to force herself to stand up. She managed to rise an inch before her knees buckled completely. She swayed to the right, letting out a confused groaning sound, and crashed heavily onto my Chesterfield sofa. Her head rolled back against the leather. Within 10 seconds, she was breathing in the deep, rattling rhythm of someone entirely unconscious. I set my tea down on the desk. The room was perfectly silent except for her heavy breathing. I stood up and walked over to her, checking her pulse. It was slow and steady. She was out cold and would be for hours. I did not waste a single second. I walked to my secure filing cabinet, unlocked the bottom safe, and pulled out a small black velvet box. Inside was a piece of equipment I had acquired during a corporate espionage audit last year. It was a military-grade micro GPS tracker, equipped with a high-frequency audio bug, no larger than a standard jacket button. Patricia had dropped her prized crocodile Birkin bag on the floor next to the sofa when she collapsed. I picked it up, admiring the absurdly expensive craftsmanship, before unzipping the main compartment. I bypassed her wallet, her keys, and her designer makeup. I found a tiny zippered pocket stitched deep into the interior silk lining. I slipped the microbug inside, pressing it firmly against the adhesive backing until it adhered directly to the leather seam. I zipped the bag closed and placed it exactly where she had dropped it. I walked back to my desk, sat down, and opened the tracking application on my secured phone. A pulsing red dot appeared on the digital map, confirming the audio feed was crystal clear. Patricia thought she was laying a trap for a naive wife. Instead, she had just walked directly into my snare, and now I had ears inside the very heart of their criminal operation. Patricia stirred on my Chesterfield sofa just past 5 in the afternoon. She groaned, rubbing her temples, her perfectly styled hair now flattened on one side. I was sitting at my desk, innocently typing on my keyboard, when she finally managed to sit up. She looked entirely disoriented. I rushed over immediately, pouring her a fresh glass of ice water, playing the role of the deeply concerned daughter-in-law. She blamed the sudden collapse on a fierce migraine and low blood sugar, completely oblivious to the industrial sedative currently leaving her system. She gathered her things, visibly embarrassed by her loss of composure. Most importantly, she grabbed her prized Birkin bag. I walked her to the front door, offering fake sympathies, and watched her stumble slightly as she climbed into her Mercedes. The moment her taillights disappeared down the street, I bolted back to my home office and locked the heavy oak door. I opened my laptop and launched the tracking interface. A pulsing red dot moved steadily down the digital map of the city, heading toward the financial district. I plugged a set of noise-canceling headphones into my laptop, activated the audio feed, and initiated a vocal enhancement algorithm to scrub the background noise of her car engine. The military-grade microphone inside her bag was flawless. I could hear the rustle of leather, the clicking of her turn signal, and her ragged breathing. 10 minutes into her drive, the audio feed picked up the sound of Patricia dialing her phone via the car's Bluetooth system. It rang twice before a man answered. Vance. Patricia said, her voice entirely stripped of the groggy confusion she had displayed in my office. Her tone was now sharp, commanding, and ruthlessly clear. "I am here, Patricia," the man replied. His voice was slick, carrying the weary caution of a corrupt lawyer who knew he was treading in dangerous waters. "Do you have an update on the timeline?" Patricia let out a harsh laugh. "The timeline is perfect. I just left the house. The little calculator is completely oblivious." She was practically tripping over herself to help me when I faked a migraine. She suspects absolutely nothing. I gritted my teeth, letting the audio software record every single syllable directly onto my encrypted hard drive. "Is the paperwork completely finalized?" Patricia demanded. "I am not paying your exorbitant retainer for loose ends." "Everything is locked in," Vance assured her. "The Delaware LLCs are fully registered under her Social Security number." The life insurance documents she signed gave Bradley the exact legal precedent he needed. "Good," Patricia snapped. "Now listen to me very carefully. The anonymous tip to the FBI is ready. I am routing it through the untraceable server exactly as we planned. They will raid the housewarming party at exactly 8 on Friday evening." A heavy pause filled the audio feed. Vance exhaled slowly. "You are absolutely sure about doing this during the party? It is incredibly high profile. There will be city officials and wealthy clients there. That is exactly why we are doing it then, Patricia sneered. It needs to be a spectacle. The FBI will tear up those floorboards in front of 50 witnesses. They will find the cartel cash, they will find the offshore corporate documents with her forged signatures, and they will drag her out in front of everyone. The accountant will be in handcuffs, and Bradley will have full power of attorney by Monday morning. My blood ran ice cold. Hearing the plan mapped out so clinically was entirely different from deducing it. They were going to parade me out of my own home like a trophy kill. What about the Miami Syndicate? Vance asked. They are not known for their patience. 8 million is a massive debt. The syndicate will get their clean money the second she takes the fall, Patricia replied smoothly. Bradley will drain her trust fund using the power of attorney. We pay off the cartel, the FBI closes their money laundering case with a neat little bow, and we walk away completely clean. Everyone wins, except Hannah. I stopped the recording, my hands shaking with a mixture of absolute rage and undeniable validation. I had the smoking gun. This audio file was a one-way ticket to federal prison for Patricia Bradley and their sleazy lawyer. It was undeniable proof of a criminal conspiracy. But my forensic training kicked in, overriding the urge to call the police right that second. If I handed this audio to the FBI now, Patricia and Bradley would claim the recording was illegally obtained. They would hire expensive defense attorneys to drag the case out for years. The cartel would realize the money was compromised and likely send someone to silence all of us permanently. No, I could not just expose them. I had to let them spring their own trap, and I had to make sure they were standing directly on the trapdoor when it opened. I needed to control the money. I needed to control the narrative. I stared at the floorboards beneath my feet. Millions of dollars in illicit cash sat just inches away in a decommissioned ventilation shaft. To beat them, I had to move that cash before Friday at 8. But the shaft dropped 2 stories down into a subterranean void. I had no idea how to safely access it without ripping up the floor and alerting Bradley. The sharp ringing of my personal cell phone shattered the silence in my office. I jumped, ripping the headphones off my ears. I grabbed the phone from my desk. The caller ID flashed Terrence's name. I answered immediately, pressing the phone to my ear. "Terrence," I said, keeping my voice low. "Did you get them?" Hannah Terrence said. He was breathing heavily, his voice echoing slightly as if he was standing in a cavernous room or a stairwell. He sounded completely rattled. "I am standing in the basement of the city archives right now. I just pulled the original 1970s blueprints for your historic block." "What did you find?" I asked, leaning forward in my chair. Hannah Terrence said, his voice dropping to a harsh, urgent whisper. "I pulled the structural schematics for the ventilation shaft. You need to see this boundary line, now." I grabbed my car keys and my encrypted burner phone. I cast one final glance at the Chesterfield sofa. Patricia was still dead to the world, paralyzed by her own chemical cocktail. Her breathing was a heavy, rhythmic rattle. I locked the office door behind me and slipped out through the garage, leaving my primary cell phone on the kitchen counter to track my location at home. Terrence had texted me an address for a secure document storage facility on the industrial east side. I drove there in total silence, keeping my eyes on the rearview mirror to ensure I was not being followed. I pulled into the deserted parking lot of a monolithic concrete warehouse. Terrence was waiting by a heavy steel side door. He scanned the perimeter before pulling me inside the cavernous building. We walked through endless rows of towering metal filing cabinets until we reached a brightly lit drafting table in the center of the room. A massive sheet of faded vellum paper was pinned to the angled surface. I had to bribe a records clerk to pull these physical copies from the deep archive, Terrence said, tapping the brittle paper. "The digital scans the city uses for standard permits are incomplete. They only show the surface-level property lines established in the late 90s. These are the original structural blueprints from 1974. I leaned over the table. The intricate blue lines detailed the foundation of my historic home and the surrounding block. "Look at the foundation footprint of your home office," Terrence instructed, tracing a thick line with a red felt tip marker. Now look at the subterranean cellar directly beneath it. I followed the path of his marker. The cellar where the cartel cash was currently sitting did not align with the exterior walls of the house above it. It extended outward, jutting past the property line and underneath the adjacent commercial alleyway. The city rezoned this entire block in 1982, Terrence explained. They widened the commercial alley to allow for garbage trucks and delivery vehicles. When they drew the new boundary lines, they sliced right through the subterranean footprint of your property. They carved out an easement. I stared at the red line intersecting the underground room. Are you telling me the cellar is not legally part of my property? Exactly, Terrence said, tapping the paper hard. The specific 3-foot by 8-foot section of the floor where the ventilation shaft drops, the money is entirely outside your legal property line. Due to that bizarre 1980s zoning error, that specific easement belongs exclusively to the adjacent commercial lot. My heart slammed against my ribs. I pulled up the city tax portal on my burner phone and typed in the address of the commercial lot directly behind my house. The screen loaded instantly. The registered owner of the lot was Vanguard Realty. It was Patricia's failing real estate firm. A cold, sharp laugh escaped my throat. Bradley and Patricia thought they were executing a flawless frame job. They had carefully chosen the hidden ventilation shaft in my office to stash the syndicate cash, assuming it firmly planted the criminal liability on my shoulders. But they never bothered to check the original physical blueprints. They were storing $8 million of illicit cartel money in an underground easement that they legally owned. The federal crime technically belongs to Patricia, I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of shock and absolute victory. When the FBI rips up those floorboards, they will find the cash. But the moment a federal prosecutor looks at the actual property lines, the jurisdiction shifts entirely to Vanguard Realty. Patricia is framing herself. It is the perfect countermeasure, Terrence agreed. You do not even have to lift a finger. They will spring their own trap and walk right into federal prison. I smiled, but the expression faded instantly as the reality of Bradley's timeline crashed over me. No, I said, gripping the edge of the drafting table. It is not enough. The zoning error clears me of the long-term federal money laundering charges, but it does not stop the immediate attack. Terrence frowned, looking confused. What do you mean? Patricia literally gave us the weapon to destroy her. I explained the phone call I had intercepted from Patricia's bag. The FBI is still going to kick down my front door at 8 o'clock on Friday night. They are not going to check 70-year-old zoning laws in the middle of a raid. They are going to see the cash under my office. They are going to put me in handcuffs, and they are going to drag me out of the housewarming party in front of 50 witnesses. I paced the length of the drafting table, my mind racing through the financial mechanics of Bradley's plan. I will be detained for at least 48 hours while my lawyers sort out the property lines and prove the money belongs to Vanguard Realty. I will eventually be cleared. But Bradley does not care if I go to prison long term. He just needs me temporarily neutralized. Terrence's eyes widened as he finally understood. The power of attorney. Exactly, I said. The moment I am arrested, Bradley will activate the emergency power of attorney document I unknowingly signed. He has an automated script set up on his encrypted iPad. While I am sitting in a federal holding cell, he is going to drain my liquidated retirement accounts and my personal $1.5 million trust fund. He will wire it to a numbered account in the Cayman Islands and vanish before the FBI realizes they arrested the wrong woman. If you cancel the automated wire transfer from his iPad, he will get a notification instantly, Terrence warned. He will know you are onto him, and he will accelerate the timeline. He could take the money and run tonight. I know, I replied, staring down at the blueprints. I cannot touch his device. I have to intercept the funds from my side. I need to drain my own trust fund and move the cash into a secure ghost account before Friday evening. You have to steal your own money back, Terrence said, shaking his head in disbelief. And you have to do it without triggering any banking alerts that Bradley might see on his linked monitoring apps. If his interface does not show a balance of $1.5 million, he will panic. I am a forensic auditor. I said, a cold, hard resolve settling over me. I know exactly how to manipulate the banking interface to display a phantom balance. I can make his screen show millions while the actual vault is completely empty. But it requires routing the money through a decentralized digital exchange to scrub the trail. I pulled my coat tightly around my shoulders. I have exactly 48 hours to secure my entire net worth and set up the ultimate financial illusion. I am going to let Bradley think he has won right up until the second he tries to steal my money and hits a brick wall. I thanked Terrence for the blueprints and headed back to my car. The real war was not about the cartel cash in the floorboards anymore. It was about outsmarting a man who thought he controlled every variable. I drove back toward my house, ready to look my treacherous husband in the eye and smile. I grabbed my bag and slung it over my shoulder. The adrenaline spiked so hard my vision blurred for a fraction of a second. I looked at Arthur, who was already moving toward the heavy oak door. "There is a service elevator at the end of the executive corridor," I said, keeping my voice tightly controlled. "Does it bypass the main lobby? It goes straight down to the subterranean loading dock," Arthur replied, his hands shaking slightly as he unlocked the deadbolt. "The catering staff uses it for board meetings. You can exit through the alleyway." "I cannot leave my car in the garage," I countered. "If Bradley sees my car parked in your designated visitor spot, he will know I am in the building. He will interrogate the receptionist, and he will tear this office apart, looking for me." We moved into the hallway. The plush carpet absorbed our footsteps as we rushed past the glass-walled conference rooms. Arthur swiped his keycard against the service elevator panel. "I will handle the car," Arthur said, his tone hardening into absolute professional resolve. "I have a spare set of keys for your model from when your father used to park his fleet here. My paralegal will drive your car out the back exit and park it 3 blocks away at the commercial shopping center. If Bradley asks, I will tell him you had your vehicle dropped off here for detailing while you were hospitalized. I will sell the lie, Hannah. You just focus on getting out of sight." The elevator doors slid open with a soft, metallic ping. I stepped inside the stainless steel box. "Do not let him intimidate you, Arthur," I warned, pressing the button for the loading dock. "He is going to demand the wire transfer confirmation. Tell him the funds are processing through a mandatory 48-hour security hold due to the size of the transaction. Give him exactly enough hope to keep him greedy and blind." Arthur nodded, adjusting his tie and straightening his posture. He is about to learn that he underestimated the wrong family. The doors closed, shutting out the polished law firm and plunging me into the harsh fluorescent glare of the service shaft. The descent felt agonizingly slow. I pulled out my burner phone. The radar application showed Bradley's blue dot entering the main lobby. He was literally walking into the building directly above my head. The elevator shuddered to a halt, and the doors scraped open. I stepped out into the cavernous concrete loading dock. The smell of damp cardboard and diesel exhaust filled the air. A massive steel roll-up door stood partially open at the end of the loading bay, letting in a slice of gray afternoon light. I walked briskly toward the exit, sticking to the shadows behind a row of industrial dumpsters. I slipped through the gap and stepped out into the narrow brick alleyway behind the building. The cold wind bit through my thin blouse, but I did not stop moving. I kept my head down, pulling my collar up to shield my face from any street-level security cameras. I walked 3 blocks north, weaving through side streets and crowded pedestrian walkways until I reached the commercial shopping center Arthur had mentioned. True to his word, my car was idling in a spot near the back of the lot. Arthur's paralegal, a sharp-looking young woman, stepped out of the driver's seat as I approached. She handed me the keys without a word, gave a brisk nod, and walked away. I climbed into the driver's seat and locked the doors. My chest heaved as I finally allowed myself to breathe. The trust fund was secure. The cartel money was legally bound to Patricia's failing real estate firm. The trap was perfectly set. Now I just had to survive the next 48 hours in the same house as a man who was actively plotting my destruction. I pulled out of the parking lot and merged onto the highway. I needed to get back to the house before Bradley finished his meeting with Arthur. I had to be exactly where a comatose woman was supposed to be, or at least maintain the illusion of my oblivious routine. Since Bradley had tracked my car, I had to ensure my location history matched a plausible alibi. I drove straight to the local pharmacy. I walked the aisles aimlessly, picking up a bottle of aspirin and a heating pad, ensuring my face was captured on the store's security cameras. I needed a verified timestamp to prove I was running mundane errands just in case he questioned my timeline. I arrived home at 6 in the evening. I parked in the garage, leaving the tracking device exactly where I assumed Bradley had hidden it under the rear bumper. Removing it would trigger an alert. Let him watch my every move. It would only reinforce his false sense of control. I walked into the kitchen and set the pharmacy bag on the marble island. The house was quiet. Too quiet. I walked over to the digital control panel on the wall. The security system was disarmed. Bradley was home. I stiffened, listening intently. There was no sound coming from the upstairs master suite or the living room. I moved silently down the hallway toward my home office. The heavy oak door was slightly ajar. I peered through the crack. Bradley was standing in the center of the room. He was wearing his tailored charcoal suit, holding a crowbar in his right hand. He was staring directly down at the specific section of the hardwood floor where the ventilation shaft dropped into the subterranean cellar, the exact spot where the $8 million in cartel cash was hidden. He raised the crowbar, adjusting his grip. He was preparing to pry the floorboards up. He was moving the money early. I froze in the hallway, my heart hammering against my ribs. If Bradley pried up those floorboards and moved the cartel cash out of that specific subterranean easement, my entire defense would instantly evaporate. The money had to stay exactly where it was until Friday night. I needed to get him out of the house, and I needed to do it in the next 60 seconds. I silently backed away from the home office door, my footsteps light against the runner rug. I slipped into the kitchen, unlocked the back door, and sprinted out into the evening air. I did not bother with my car. The upscale commercial district was only 4 blocks away. I ran through the manicured back alleys of our neighborhood, my lungs burning in the crisp air, my mind calculating the fastest way to trigger his control issues. I burst through the glass doors of an exclusive high-end boutique called Laurent. The sudden transition from the cold street to the warmly lit lavender-scented showroom was jarring. I smoothed my hair, took a deep stabilizing breath, and walked straight toward a display of evening gowns. I did not look at the price tags. I grabbed a shimmering emerald green silk dress and marched directly to the polished glass checkout counter. I pulled out our joint platinum credit card and slapped it onto the glass. Bradley was a control freak who monitored every single cent that moved through our shared accounts. He had push notifications set for any transaction over $500. Swiping this card was the digital equivalent of firing a flare gun. The sales associate smiled, bagging the dress with meticulous care. The moment she handed me the receipt, my burner phone vibrated in my pocket. It was a proximity alert from the tracking application. Bradley's dot was moving rapidly. He had dropped the crowbar. He was out of the house and coming straight for me. I turned slowly, pretending to browse a display of diamond tennis bracelets near the front window. I needed my breathing to slow down. I needed to look like a woman who had been leisurely shopping for the past hour, not a woman who had just sprinted 4 blocks to prevent a cartel money laundering scheme from being relocated. Less than 8 minutes later, the heavy glass doors of the boutique swung open with violent force. Bradley stormed inside. He had not even bothered to put on a coat. His suit jacket was unbuttoned, his tie was slightly askew, and a visible pulse pounded at his temple. He scanned the showroom, his eyes locking onto me with the predatory intensity of a cornered animal. He marched across the plush carpet, entirely ignoring the shocked sales associates. "What exactly are you doing, Hannah?" he demanded, his voice a harsh, aggressive hiss. He grabbed my upper arm, his fingers digging into my skin just hard enough to leave a bruise. "You are supposed to be at home." I checked the garage. "Your car is there. Why are you sneaking around the city on foot?" I let a look of utter confusion wash over my face. I pulled my arm out of his grasp, stepping back and clutching the shopping bag to my chest. "Sneaking around," I echoed, keeping my voice wavering and defensive. "Bradley, I am shopping for Friday night. I just walked over to clear my head. Why are you acting like this?" "Do not play games with me," he snapped, stepping closer and crowding my physical space. "You have been paranoid all week. You are erratic." My mother comes over to check on you, and you practically throw her out of the house. Now you are wandering the streets in the dark, running up thousands of dollars on the joint account without saying a single word. You are losing your grip, Hannah. You need to tell me what is wrong with you right now. It was a brilliant, aggressive offensive. He was projecting his own panic onto me, laying the groundwork for the narrative of the hysterical, unstable wife. If I fought back with logic, he would escalate. I had to give him exactly what his ego demanded. I had to give him a breakdown. I let my shoulders slump. I forced my breathing to turn ragged and shallow. I thought about the sheer exhaustion of the past few days, the absolute terror of the FBI raid, the cartel debt, the betrayal, and I let all of that pressure push hot, stinging tears into my eyes. I am just so tired, Bradley, I sobbed, my voice cracking perfectly. I covered my face with my free hand, letting the tears spill over my cheeks and ruin my expensive makeup. I am so incredibly stressed about this housewarming party. Patricia hates everything I do. She criticized the catering menu. She said I was completely incapable of hosting your partners. I just wanted to find a dress that would make you proud of me. I wanted to look perfect for your clients, and I felt like I was suffocating in that house. I let out a loud, pathetic hiccup. I played the role of the fragile, broken woman who was crumbling under the weight of domestic expectations. I leaned into him, resting my forehead against his chest, crying into the lapel of his tailored suit. I am sorry, I whispered weakly. I am just so overwhelmed. I do not know what I am doing anymore. The transformation in Bradley was instantaneous. The rigid, aggressive tension vanished from his body. The suspicious glare in his eyes melted away. He let out a long, heavy exhale, wrapping his arms around my shoulders and pulling me into a comforting embrace. I could feel the arrogant, patronizing smirk spreading across his face, even without looking up. He loved this. He absolutely thrived on my perceived weakness. A capable, intelligent wife was a threat to his operation. A weeping, insecure, emotionally dependent wife was the perfect scapegoat. "Shh, it is okay, Hannah," he murmured, stroking my hair with a sickeningly gentle hand. He looked up at the hovering sales associate, offering her an apologetic, long-suffering smile. "You are just overthinking everything, baby. My mother is hard on you, but she means well. You just need to let me handle the heavy lifting." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his heavy black titanium card. He tossed it onto the glass counter. "Find a pair of shoes to match the dress," he told the clerk, his voice dripping with wealthy magnanimity. "Throw in that diamond bracelet she was looking at, too." The total rang up to over $10,000. Bradley did not even blink as he signed the receipt. He was buying a prop for his grand finale. He wanted me dressed in diamonds and emerald silk when the federal agents kicked down the door. He wanted the visual contrast of a glamorous, spoiled housewife being dragged away in handcuffs for running an underground financial syndicate. He handed me the heavy shopping bags, kissing my forehead with a chillingly authentic display of affection. "Just relax for the party on Friday, babe," he said, smoothing a stray tear from my cheek. "I have everything under control. You do not need to worry about a single thing. Just look beautiful." I looked up at the man who had forged my signature, stolen my identity, and sold my future to a cartel. I wiped the last fake tear from my eye and gave him a bright, sweet, utterly devoted smile. "I will, Bradley," I whispered, clutching the bags tightly. "I cannot wait." The morning sun cast long shadows across the marble kitchen island. Bradley had left for the office early, leaving behind a handwritten note and a platinum credit card instructing me to treat myself to a spa day. I stared at the note, feeling a cold satisfaction. My performance had worked flawlessly. He believed I was a fragile, vanity-obsessed housewife teetering on the edge of a nervous breakdown. He had given me a blank check and a full day of unsupervised freedom. I grabbed the encrypted burner phone and sent a single text to Terrence. "It is time. Set the meeting." 2 hours later, I was sitting in a corner booth of a dimly lit diner on the outskirts of the city. The vinyl seats were cracked, and the smell of stale coffee hung in the air. It was the absolute last place anyone from Bradley or Patricia's circles would ever go. I had a heavy leather messenger bag resting on the seat beside me. A man slid into the booth across from me. He wore a slightly rumpled, off-the-rack suit and carried a battered briefcase. His badge identified him as Agent Marcus Cole from the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Financial Crimes Division. Terrence had reached out to him through an old contact, ensuring the meeting remained entirely off the official books. Cole ordered a black coffee and looked at me with tired, cynical eyes. He did not look impressed. "Listen, Mrs. Thorne," he began, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "Your friend Terrence pulled a lot of strings to get me here, but I am going to be straight with you. I deal with multi-million-dollar syndicate fraud. I do not handle domestic disputes. If your husband is hiding assets before a divorce, you need to hire a shark attorney, not the federal government." "I am not here about a divorce, Agent Cole," I said, keeping my voice perfectly level. He sighed, leaning back against the vinyl seat. "Then what are you here for?" "Because usually when wealthy spouses ask for covert meetings, it is because they caught their husband funneling money to a mistress, and they want us to freeze his accounts out of spite. The FBI is not your personal revenge squad." I reached into the leather messenger bag and pulled out a massive 300-page binder, slamming it down onto the laminated table. The heavy thud made the coffee cups rattle. "I am a senior forensic auditor," I said, sliding the binder across the table. "I do not do revenge. I do math. And the math in that binder proves my husband is laundering cartel money through a failing commercial real estate firm owned by Vanguard Realty." Cole stared at the binder, then slowly looked up at me. The condescension in his eyes flickered, replaced by a sharp, cautious curiosity. He opened the heavy cover. For the next hour, the diner completely faded away. I walked him through every single page. I showed him the offshore shell companies Bradley had established using my forged signature. I traced the specific wire transfers moving from dummy accounts in the Cayman Islands straight into the operational budget of Vanguard Realty. I broke down the exact financial algorithms Bradley used to mask the illicit funds under the guise of inflated property renovation costs. I did not stop there. I pulled out the structural blueprints Terrence had procured from the city archives. I showed Cole the red line detailing the subterranean easement mapping exactly where the ventilation shaft in my home office dropped the cash directly into property legally owned by Vanguard Realty. Then I placed a small silver flash drive on top of the blueprints. "That contains the hidden camera footage captured by my nanny Sylvia," I explained. "You will see clear time-stamped video of my husband and Patricia, the owner of Vanguard Realty, physically accessing the ventilation shaft. You will hear audio of them discussing the drop schedule, the cartel payouts, and their explicit plan to frame me for the entire operation." Agent Cole did not say a word. He just kept turning the pages. The skepticism that had clouded his face was entirely gone, replaced by the intense, focused energy of a predator that had just been handed the perfect hunt. He flipped through the forensic audit, tracing the numbers, checking my cross-references, and validating the shell company structures. "You did all of this yourself?" he finally asked, looking up at me. "Every single page," I confirmed. "It is a flawless audit. If you hand this to a federal prosecutor, they will have a grand jury indictment drafted by midnight." Cole leaned back, running a hand over his face. He let out a low whistle of absolute disbelief. "We have been trying to build a case against Vanguard Realty for 14 months. He admitted, his voice dropping to an urgent hush. "They use encrypted ledgers. They use untraceable couriers. We knew the syndicate was using them to clean cash, but we could never find the physical drop site. We could never tie the offshore shell accounts directly to their domestic operations." He tapped the heavy binder. "You just handed me the missing link. You gave us the drop site, the money trail, the shell structures, and the video confessions. This is not just a case, Mrs. Thorne. This is a career-making bust." "I know," I said, crossing my arms, "and I am handing it to you on a silver platter, but I need something in return. I need you to stick to Bradley's exact timeline." Cole frowned, leaning forward. "What do you mean?" "Bradley intercepted a federal wiretap," I explained. "He knows your division is planning to raid my house this Friday at 8 in the evening. He thinks you are coming for me. He thinks I'm going to take the fall for the money in the floorboards so he can drain my trust fund while I'm sitting in a holding cell. I need you to execute that raid exactly when he expects it. I need him to feel invincible right up until the second you put the handcuffs on him." Cole stared at me, a slow, sharp smile spreading across his face. You want us to play into his trap. I want him destroyed. I corrected my voice, dropping to a cold, hard whisper. I want him to watch his entire empire collapse in front of his wealthy clients. Cole tapped his fingers against the table, thinking it through. A raid of this magnitude requires securing the perimeter and ensuring all primary targets are isolated. If we hit the house during a party, it increases the risk of chaos. There will be no chaos, I assured him. Cole closed the binder and pulled the flash drive into his pocket. His eyes locked onto mine, burning with intense professional resolve. We will execute the raid at 8 o'clock on Friday, just as they planned, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. But you need to keep them in that exact room when we breach the doors. I smiled, feeling the final piece of the puzzle lock perfectly into place. I will have them standing right on top of the money. Thursday morning arrived with a heavy gray sky pressing down on the city. The house smelled of expensive floral arrangements and the lingering scent of wood polish from the recent renovations. I was standing in the kitchen organizing the catering schedule when the doorbell chimed. I opened the heavy oak front door to find Patricia standing on the porch. She was wearing a pristine white cashmere coat and carrying a thick binder of fabric swatches. Her smile was sharp and predatory. I came to help you decorate for tomorrow, she announced, stepping past me without waiting for an invitation. Bradley told me you were feeling a bit overwhelmed, darling. We cannot have you breaking down before the guests arrive. I forced my shoulders to tense, playing the role of the fragile, exhausted wife. I am just trying to make sure everything is perfect, I said, my voice trembling slightly. Bradley has so many important clients coming. Patricia patted my arm with a hand that felt like ice. Do not worry, sweetie, she purred. I am going to make sure everything is exactly where it needs to be. Why do you not go into the kitchen and review the wine list? I need to measure the home office for those new velvet drapes I suggested. I nodded meekly and retreated down the hallway. The moment the kitchen door swung shut behind me, my fragile posture vanished. I pulled my encrypted burner phone from my pocket and opened the hidden security application. Earlier that week, I had installed a series of microscopic pinhole cameras, seamlessly integrated into the crown molding of every room on the ground floor. I tapped the screen and brought up the live feed for the home office. Patricia was not measuring the windows. She was standing directly behind my mahogany desk. I watched her glance over her shoulder toward the hallway to ensure she was alone. Then she reached into her designer handbag and pulled out a cheap black burner phone. She powered the device on, swiped through the screen for a few seconds, and then opened the bottom drawer of my desk. She shoved the phone deep into the back corner, hiding it underneath a thick stack of my old tax returns. She pushed the drawer shut with a satisfied smirk. I stared at the screen, my blood running cold. She was planting the final piece of digital evidence. When the FBI raided the house tomorrow night, they would tear that office apart looking for the cartel cash in the floorboards. They would find the cash, and then they would find the burner phone conveniently hidden in my personal desk space. Patricia walked out of the office on the live feed, calling out that she was heading upstairs to check the guest bathrooms. I had roughly 4 minutes. I moved silently out of the kitchen and slipped into the home office. I pulled the bottom drawer open and reached past the tax returns. My fingers brushed against the cheap plastic casing of the burner phone. I pulled it out and tapped the screen. It was not locked. I opened the messaging application. There was only one conversation thread filled with messages sent over the last 3 weeks. The texts were aggressively incriminating. Shipment delayed due to customs. Ensure the $8 million is deposited by Friday. Do not mess this up, Hannah. It was a crude, heavy-handed frame job, but in the chaotic aftermath of a federal raid, it would be more than enough to secure my immediate arrest. I needed to move the phone. I needed to plant it somewhere the FBI would inevitably search, but a place inextricably tied to Bradley. I slipped the phone into my pocket and walked swiftly down the hall to the mudroom. Bradley's custom leather golf bag was sitting in the corner. It was his most prized possession, and he took it to every single partner retreat and high-stakes corporate negotiation. The FBI Financial Crimes Division would seize it as a matter of standard protocol to search for hidden hard drives or offshore account keys. I dropped to my knees and pulled a small steel seam ripper from my pocket. I grabbed the heaviest side pocket of the leather bag, the one Bradley used to store his expensive rain gear. I carefully sliced through the thick nylon lining at the very bottom, creating a gap just wide enough for my hand. I shoved the burner phone deep inside the cavity, pushing it down into the padded base of the bag where it would be impossible to feel from the outside. I pulled a pre-threaded needle from my pocket and stitched the nylon lining back together with rapid, precise movements. The thick black thread blended perfectly into the dark fabric. The repair was completely invisible. I stood up, brushed the dust from my knees, and walked back to the kitchen. I was pouring a cup of coffee when Patricia finally came back downstairs. She walked into the kitchen, pulling her cashmere coat tightly around her waist. She looked immensely pleased with herself. The trap was set, and she believed I was walking blindly into the slaughter. "I think the house is going to look spectacular," she said, picking up her binder of swatches. "You just focus on resting today, Hannah. Tomorrow is going to be a very big night." I walked her to the front door, maintaining my mask of naive gratitude. "Thank you for your help, Patricia," I said. "I really appreciate you taking the time." Patricia turned and pulled me into a sudden, tight embrace. The smell of her heavy floral perfume was suffocating. She leaned her head next to mine, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Tomorrow night, your whole life is going to change, sweetie." I let a cold, razor-sharp smile touch my lips where she could not see it. I wrapped my arms around her shoulders and hugged her back tightly. "I am counting on it, Patricia." Friday afternoon crept in with a deceptive stillness. Downstairs, the caterers had commandeered the kitchen, transforming the ground floor into a chaotic symphony of clinking silver and hushed, urgent commands. I remained isolated in the master suite, sitting perfectly still before the vanity mirror. I had spent the last 2 hours applying my makeup with surgical precision. I contoured my cheekbones to look slightly sharper, slightly more severe. I chose a deep crimson lipstick that matched the heavy emerald silk dress Bradley had bought me. I was dressing for a part. I was preparing to be the glamorous, oblivious villain in my husband's carefully scripted play. The bedroom door opened with a soft click. Bradley walked in, bringing the sharp scent of bergamot cologne and aged scotch with him. He was already dressed in a bespoke, midnight blue velvet dinner jacket, his dark hair styled perfectly, his smile practiced and smooth. He looked like the picture of affluent success. He looked like a man who did not have a care in the world. He approached my vanity, his eyes raking over my reflection in the mirror. He held a wide, flat box covered in black velvet behind his back. "You look breathtaking, Hannah," he said, his voice dropping an octave into that smooth, persuasive tone he used when closing a hostile corporate acquisition. "But you are missing one thing." He stepped behind me and brought the velvet box forward, resting it on the polished wood of the vanity. He popped the silver latch. The lid snapped open, revealing a blinding cascade of brilliant cut diamonds set in heavy platinum. It was an extravagant piece, a thick collar of interlocking gems that looked heavy enough to drag my head down. It was the kind of jewelry that screamed of new money and reckless spending. It was exactly the kind of accessory an FBI financial profiler would expect to see wrapped around the neck of a cartel money launderer. I stared at the sparkling stones and my breath hitched. It was a genuine reaction, but not for the reason Bradley assumed. I was not blinded by the diamonds. I was blinded by the math. I recognized the distinct platinum setting and the specific cut of the central stones. It was a signature piece from a private jeweler in Geneva. My mind raced, instantly pulling up the digital ledger from the 300-page forensic audit I had handed to Agent Cole. I knew exactly how much this necklace cost. It was $142,000. And I knew exactly where that $142,000 had come from. Bradley had not used his corporate bonus. He had not dipped into the syndicate cash hidden beneath my office floorboards. He had used the very last of the funds from my drained retirement account. Just 3 days ago, he had forged my digital signature to bypass the early withdrawal penalties and liquidate my entire 401k. He had taken the money I had spent a decade earning, and he had turned it into a prop to frame me for his federal crimes. He bought the weapon he planned to hang me with using my own money. Bradley lifted the heavy diamond collar from the velvet lining. I want you to wear this tonight, he murmured, stepping closer until his chest brushed against the back of my chair. I want my partners to see how well I take care of you. I want everyone in that room to look at you and know exactly who we are. I kept my expression perfectly frozen in a mask of overwhelming awe. I reached up and touched the cold stones as he draped the heavy platinum around my neck. The metal was freezing against my skin. Bradley, this is too much, I whispered, forcing my voice to tremble with fake emotion. It must have cost a fortune. I cannot believe you did this. You deserve it after the week you have had, he said smoothly. His cold fingers brushed against my nape as he fastened the complicated double clasp. The lock clicked shut with a sharp metallic snap. It felt exactly like a pair of handcuffs closing around my wrists. He rested his hands on my bare shoulders, leaning down so his face was right next to mine in the mirror. You have been so stressed about this party, Hannah. I just wanted to remind you that I handle everything. I always provide for my wife. The sheer arrogance of his performance was breathtaking. He was dressing me up as the greedy, oblivious cartel wife so that when the federal agents breached the front doors in exactly 2 hours, they would see a woman dripping in illicit wealth. He was layering the visual evidence to ensure I fit their psychological profile perfectly. I looked at our reflection in the glass. We looked like a magazine cover. The powerful, handsome executive and his stunning, jewel-draped wife. I let a tear pool in the corner of my eye, catching the light of the vanity bulbs. It is the most beautiful thing I have ever seen, I said softly, reaching up to cover his hand with mine. I will never take it off. Good, he said, his smirk widening into a full, genuine smile. He patted my shoulder and stepped back, admiring his handiwork. You stay up here and finish getting ready. Make a grand entrance. Let them wait for you. I am going to go downstairs and check the wine cellar before the caterers start pouring. He turned and walked out of the master suite, shutting the door quietly behind him. I dropped my hand from the necklace the moment the latch clicked. My tear dried instantly. I stared at the heavy, blinding diamonds resting against my collarbone. It was the physical manifestation of his ultimate betrayal. He thought this collar would drag me down into a federal prison cell. He thought I was standing blindly on the trapdoor. I ran a finger over the largest central diamond, feeling its sharp, perfect edge. I will wear it for the mugshots, I thought to myself, but they will not be mine. Downstairs, the melodic chime of the front doorbell echoed through the expansive house. The heavy oak doors were opening. The quiet murmur of voices drifted up the sweeping staircase. The first guests had arrived. The clock on my vanity read exactly 6 o'clock. I had exactly 2 hours to herd Bradley and Patricia into my home office and lock them inside with their own buried secrets. I stood up, smoothing the emerald silk of my dress, and turned toward the door. The party was about to begin. The heavy oak doors of the grand foyer stood wide open, welcoming the damp evening air. I stood at the very top of the sweeping staircase, taking a slow, deliberate breath. The platinum and diamond collar rested against my collarbone like a solid block of ice. Below me, the house had transformed into a staging ground for the city elite. A hired string quartet played a vibrant classical piece in the corner of the grand hall. Waiters in crisp black uniforms moved silently through the crowd, balancing silver trays of champagne and caviar. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume-roasted garlic and aged bourbon. Bradley had spared absolutely no expense for this housewarming. He had invited local politicians, prominent real estate moguls, and the senior executives of Vanguard Realty. It was a room filled with predators masquerading as high society, and I was about to feed every single one of them to the federal government. I descended the stairs, keeping my posture perfectly straight. The heavy emerald silk of my dress rustled against the carpet. I spotted Bradley immediately. He was standing near the towering arched windows, holding a crystal glass of scotch, laughing loudly at a joke made by a city councilman. He looked completely invincible. I turned my gaze toward the main living room. Patricia was holding court by the grand marble fireplace. She wore a tailored crimson pantsuit that matched the sharp, aggressive angle of her smile. She was surrounded by the wives of Bradley's investors, a captive audience hanging onto her every word. I forced a soft, submissive smile onto my face and walked directly into the lion den. Patricia spotted me instantly. Her eyes darted straight to the diamond collar around my neck. A flash of pure, unfiltered jealousy crossed her face before she quickly masked it with a patronizing grin. "Oh, there she is," she announced, her voice cutting through the ambient noise of the party. "Everyone turn and look, finally, out of hiding." The group of women turned to stare at me. I kept my head slightly bowed, playing the role of the overwhelmed, timid wife perfectly. "Good evening, Patricia," I said, my voice soft and deferential. "The house looks wonderful tonight." Patricia let out a loud, theatrical laugh. She stepped forward and grabbed my wrist, pulling me into the center of the circle like a prop. "Of course it looks wonderful," she declared, gesturing toward the vaulted ceilings and the custom drapery. "I had to practically design this entire floor myself. Bradley is simply too busy building his empire to worry about thread counts and color swatches." One of the investors' wives, a woman dripping in inherited wealth, looked at me with thin, veiled pity. "Did you not want to decorate your own home, Hannah?" Patricia did not even let me open my mouth. "Oh, Hannah lacks the eye for this sort of thing," she interrupted, waving her champagne glass dismissively. "She prefers the dull things in life." "What exactly do you do?" Hannah, another woman, asked, taking a sip of her drink. "She plays with calculators," Patricia stated loudly, ensuring her voice carried across the entire room. "She does auditing or something dreadfully boring like that. It is all spreadsheets and fluorescent lights. My son works so incredibly hard securing international capital, and Hannah just sits in a cubicle crunching numbers. It is a good thing Bradley bought her those diamonds, or she would completely fade into the wallpaper." The women let out a chorus of polite, uncomfortable laughter. I felt the sharp, icy edge of the necklace digging into my skin. I did not flinch. I did not defend myself. I just offered them a vacant, pleasant smile. I just crunched the numbers, I agreed softly. Little did they know I had crunched the exact numbers that would send Patricia and her son to a federal penitentiary for the next 2 decades. Bradley suddenly materialized beside me, sliding a heavy, possessive arm around my waist. He kissed my temple, playing the role of the fiercely devoted husband. He squeezed my hip, a silent warning to remain quiet and look pretty. "Now, mother, do not tease my beautiful wife," he said, his tone entirely patronizing. "She keeps the domestic checkbook balanced so I can focus on the global acquisitions. We make the perfect team." Patricia smiled, a cold, reptilian expression. "The perfect team," she echoed, raising her glass. I excused myself from the circle, citing a need to check on the catering staff. Bradley let me go, turning his attention back to his wealthy marks. I walked past the wet bar and slipped into the shadowy alcove near the hallway. Terrence and Megan were standing in the corner, entirely separated from the rest of the party. Terrence was leaning against the wall, watching the room with sharp, calculating eyes. Megan stood beside him, clutching a glass of sparkling water with white-knuckled tension. She looked absolutely miserable. She was staring at her shoes, refusing to make eye contact with anyone. She knew how toxic this family was. She knew the poison that ran through Bradley and Patricia's veins, and the guilt of her own silent complicity was weighing heavily on her shoulders. I walked past them. Megan looked up, her eyes flashing with deep, profound shame, before she quickly looked away. Terrence, however, did not look away. He stepped slightly forward as I passed. His eyes locked onto mine. There was no fear in his expression. There was only the cold, hard readiness of a man who had helped me rig the explosives. We did not exchange a single word, but the communication was deafening. The noise of the party swelled. The string quartet shifted into a rapid, frantic tempo. Waiters rushed past, carrying silver platters of roasted lamb and truffle crostini. Bradley was leading a group of Vanguard Realty executives toward the hallway, pointing toward the home office. He was showing off the architecture. He was gathering his co-conspirators right on top of the subterranean drop zone. I stood in the center of the foyer, the heavy diamonds biting into my neck. I looked across the crowded room and found Terrence again. He gave me a slow, deliberate nod. Without breaking eye contact, he raised his left wrist and tapped the face of his silver watch with his index finger. It is exactly 7:45. 15 minutes to the raid. The sharp, piercing ring of silver striking crystal cut through the low, ambient roar of the party. The hired string quartet abruptly stopped playing, holding their bows suspended over their instruments. Laughter faded into an expectant hush as every face in the grand foyer turned toward the sweeping staircase. Bradley was standing on the second step holding a silver espresso spoon against his empty Scotch glass. He looked down at the sea of wealthy investors, local politicians, and Vanguard Realty executives with the magnetic ease of a born leader. The bespoke midnight blue velvet of his dinner jacket caught the light from the towering chandelier, making him look like royalty holding court. He reached out his free hand toward me. "Come here, darling," he murmured, his voice carrying effortlessly across the silent room. I forced a shy, overwhelmed smile and stepped forward, allowing him to pull me up onto the marble step beside him. He wrapped his arm tightly around my waist, pulling my back flush against his chest. His fingers dug into the heavy emerald silk of my dress right above my hip, a silent, physical command to play my part. The massive diamond collar rested like a block of ice against my throat, heavy and suffocating. "Thank you all for being here tonight," Bradley began, his voice rich and resonant, bouncing off the vaulted ceilings. "When my mother and I first envisioned Vanguard Realty expanding our portfolio into this incredible neighborhood, we knew we needed a headquarters that reflected our sheer ambition. This house is a testament to that vision." A polite murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd of elites. Glasses were raised in silent salute. "But a house is just walls and glass," Bradley continued, dropping his tone into something sickeningly intimate. He looked down at me, his eyes filled with a manufactured warmth that made my stomach violently turn. "What makes it a home is the woman standing next to me." He kissed my temple. The crowd let out a collective sympathetic sigh. "Hannah has been my absolute rock," he declared, projecting his voice so every single federal agent listening through the wiretaps could hear his flawless alibi. "Building an empire is demanding. It requires long hours, impossible decisions, and carrying a burden I would never want to place on my beautiful, innocent wife. I handle the heavy lifting so she does not have to. She asks no questions. She simply makes my life perfect. I bought her these diamonds today because even the brightest gems pale in comparison to her blind loyalty." The hypocrisy was a physical weight pressing down on the room. He was practically testifying to his own innocence, framing me as the oblivious, spoiled beneficiary of his hard work. He was establishing his legal defense, setting the narrative that if any illicit cartel funds were found in this house, he was completely shocked, and I was the greedy mastermind spending his money. It was a masterful, terrifying performance. I glanced toward the grand marble fireplace. Patricia was pressing a white lace handkerchief to the corner of her eye, wiping away a perfectly timed fake tear. She looked at the crowd, shaking her head with maternal pride. "He works so incredibly hard for her," Patricia whispered loudly enough for the investors' wives around her to hear. "He shields her from the ugly side of the business. He just wants to give her the world and she just takes it." I looked up at Bradley, letting my eyes shine with absolute, utter devotion. I reached up and touched the diamond collar, resting my fingers over the cold platinum clasp that secured it to my neck. "I love you, Bradley," I said, my voice trembling with exactly the right amount of engineered emotion. "You have given me everything I deserve." He smiled, his ego inflating with every word. He raised his empty glass to the room. To Vanguard Realty, he toasted. To family. And to the future. The guests raised their glasses, echoing the toast with a thunderous cheer. The string quartet immediately launched back into a lively, upbeat symphony. The tension broke, and the party resumed its chaotic, wealthy rhythm. Bradley released my waist, turning instantly to shake hands with a city councilman who had approached the stairs. I stepped down into the crowd, the applause ringing hollow in my ears. I needed to move. The narrative was set. Bradley and Patricia had just painted themselves as the hard-working, innocent titans of industry. They were high on their own supply, completely intoxicated by the power of their lies and the adoration of the room. I checked my surroundings. Terrence was no longer standing by the shadowy alcove. He had seamlessly shifted toward the back doors, ensuring the catering staff kept the exit paths entirely clear of equipment. Megan was standing near the wet bar, gripping her glass of sparkling water, staring at Bradley with a look of pure, unadulterated terror. She knew the clock was ticking down to zero. I walked toward the center of the room, letting the guests compliment the house and fawn over the diamond necklace. I smiled. I nodded. I played the perfect gracious hostess. Every second stretched into an agonizing eternity. The heat of the room was becoming unbearable. The heavy floral perfume, the smell of roasted meat, the blinding lights, it was absolutely suffocating. A prominent real estate developer cornered me near the dining room, launching into a monotonous monologue about commercial zoning permits. I nodded along, feigning intense interest while my mind counted the seconds. A sharp, short vibration pulsed against my left wrist. I stopped mid-stride, cutting the developer off with a polite apology. I stepped behind a towering floral arrangement, shielding myself from the view of the main hall. I pulled back the heavy emerald silk sleeve of my dress, exposing the sleek black face of my smartwatch. A single encrypted text message illuminated the small screen. The sender was simply listed as C. The message was exactly 6 words long. 2 minutes out. Get them to the study. I stared at the glowing green letters. The air in my lungs turned to ice. The federal raid was no longer a theoretical threat. It was an incoming kinetic strike. Fully armed FBI tactical units were currently mobilizing on my street, sealing off the manicured back alleys and locking down the entire perimeter of the property. I swiped the message away and dropped my sleeve, hiding the watch. I looked across the grand hall. Bradley was still laughing with the councilman. Patricia was still holding court by the fireplace. It was time to spring the trap. I stepped out from the shadow of the towering floral arrangement and walked directly into the center of the grand hall. The heavy platinum collar around my neck no longer felt like a chain. It felt like armor. I grabbed a fresh flute of champagne from a passing waiter and smoothly lifted a silver dessert fork from a nearby catering station. I struck the crystal glass 3 times. The sharp ringing notes pierced the ambient chatter of the room. The string quartet immediately ceased playing. Dozens of conversations halted mid-sentence. Every prominent Investor City official and Vanguard Realty executive turned to look at me. I found Bradley and Patricia standing near the bar. They both looked mildly surprised but maintained their practiced wealthy smiles. Bradley gave such a beautiful toast a moment ago, I began projecting my voice so it carried to the furthest corners of the foyer. I made sure to infuse my tone with absolute, breathless devotion. He spoke about building an empire and about the future of this family. He has given me so much tonight, and he has worked tirelessly to build this incredible life for us. I paused, letting a soft, appreciative smile spread across my face. But I could not let the night go by without giving something back, I continued. Bradley and Patricia, I actually have a special private surprise for both of you. It is something I have been working on for quite some time. A gift that truly reflects exactly what you have built here. Patricia raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. Her eyes darted toward Bradley. I have it waiting in the study, I said, gesturing down the wide hallway. I would love for you both to come and open it right now. I watched the realization wash over their faces. It was a masterpiece of subtle micro-expressions. First there was confusion, followed almost instantly by a flash of predatory excitement. Bradley and Patricia exchanged a swift, triumphant glance. They were absolutely thrilled. They wanted me in that study. The study was the exact location where they had buried the illicit cartel funds beneath the floorboards. In their minds, I was voluntarily walking myself onto the trapdoor. They assumed I had bought them some overpriced watch or a piece of commissioned artwork, and that I was about to stand right on top of the federal evidence when the FBI breached the doors. They thought I was doing their dirty work for them, tying the final knot in my own noose. "Oh, Hannah, you really did not have to do that," Bradley said, his voice dripping with fake affection as he stepped forward. He reached out and took my hand, playing the role of the doting husband for his audience. I insisted, I replied, my voice equally sweet. Patricia glided across the room and linked her arm through mine. Her grip was tight, her manicured nails digging slightly into my skin. She smelled heavily of expensive jasmine perfume and deceit. "Well, we simply cannot keep our guests waiting too long," Patricia announced to the crowd, flashing a brilliant smile. "We will be right back. Enjoy the caviar, everyone." Bradley placed his hand on the small of my back, guiding me toward the hallway. We walked away from the glittering lights of the grand foyer, leaving the chatter and the string quartet behind. As we moved down the quiet corridor, I glanced over my shoulder. Terrence was standing near the kitchen entrance, his arms crossed over his chest. He gave me one final, imperceptible nod before turning to secure the back exit. Bradley pushed open the heavy, solid mahogany doors of the home office. The room was dark and quiet, insulated from the noise of the party. The only light came from the brass lamps mounted on the dark wood-paneled walls, and the moonlight spilling through the large bay windows. "It is right over here," I said, walking toward the center of the room. I moved past the massive leather-topped desk and stopped right in the middle of the vintage Persian rug. I looked down at the polished oak floorboards. I knew exactly what was resting 18 inches beneath my heels. Millions of dollars in vacuum-sealed cartel cash waiting to be unearthed. I stepped backward, pointing to the center of the rug. "Stand right there," I instructed, "both of you." Bradley chuckled, shaking his head as he stepped onto the center of the rug. He shoved his hands into his pockets, looking around the dim room with arrogant amusement. Patricia stepped up right beside him, smoothing the front of her crimson suit. They stood shoulder to shoulder, their weight pressing down on the hidden vault. They looked so incredibly smug. They thought they had won. They thought they had successfully framed a naive, innocent woman and secured their stolen empire. "All right," Hannah, Bradley said, flashing his charming, lethal smile. "We are standing exactly where you told us to. Now where is this big surprise?" I dropped the sweet, devoted smile. The muscles in my face went entirely slack. I stared at them, letting the cold, hard truth bleed into my eyes. The facade was completely gone. I was no longer the submissive wife. I was the architect of their destruction. "It is arriving right now," I said, my voice dropping to a flat, icy whisper. Patricia frowned, her eyes narrowing as she registered the sudden shift in my tone. "Hannah, what are you talking about?" she demanded, taking a half step forward. Before I could answer, the night air was shattered by a sound so loud and violent it vibrated through the floorboards. The heavy, deafening wail of multiple sirens erupted outside the house. The screech of tires and the slamming of heavy vehicle doors echoed from the front driveway. A second later, intense strobing lights tore through the darkness outside. Brilliant, aggressive flashes of red and blue violently illuminated the home office, painting Bradley and Patricia's shocked faces in alternating colors of panic. The blinding strobe of red and blue lights violently sliced through the darkness of the home office. A split second later, a thunderous crash echoed from the grand foyer. It was the distinct, unmistakable sound of solid oak doors being splintered off their hinges by a tactical battering ram. Screams erupted. The refined, elegant chatter of the city elite instantly dissolved into a chaotic symphony of shattering, crystal-panicked shouting and the heavy, relentless thud of tactical boots hitting the marble floors. "FBI, nobody move. Keep your hands where we can see them." The booming, amplified commands carried down the hallway, shaking the very foundation of the house. The string quartet died in a discordant screech of a cello bow slipping across the strings. I could hear the sounds of panic echoing from the living room. Prominent politicians and Vanguard Realty executives were throwing themselves to the ground. Women in designer gowns were dropping their champagne flutes, sobbing in sheer terror as federal agents secured the perimeter. The high society facade had been brutally and efficiently shattered. Bradley and Patricia froze. Their smug, victorious expressions instantly morphed into masks of orchestrated panic. Bradley grabbed Patricia by the shoulders, pulling her behind him in a display of protective chivalry that made my stomach turn. He was hitting his marks. He was hitting his cues exactly as they had rehearsed in the dark corners of their twisted minds. The heavy mahogany doors of the study were violently kicked open. 4 agents clad in full tactical gear poured into the room. Assault rifles swept the perimeter before locking onto us. The laser sights cut through the dim air, settling directly onto Bradley's chest. Hands in the air, step away from the desk. The lead agent barked, his voice devoid of any hesitation. Bradley immediately raised his hands, his face the perfect picture of a terrified law-abiding citizen caught in a waking nightmare. Patricia let out a shrill, practiced gasp, clutching her chest as she cowered behind her son. I raised my hands slowly, keeping my face entirely devoid of emotion. A moment later, Agent Cole walked through the shattered doorway. He did not wear tactical gear. He wore a sharp gray suit and an expression of absolute, uncompromising authority. His eyes scanned the room, taking in the scene with cold calculation. He looked at Bradley. He looked at Patricia. Then his eyes locked onto me. Patricia did not miss a single beat. She saw her moment and lunged for it with the desperate, vicious energy of a cornered predator. "Officers!" Patricia shrieked, her voice trembling with a flawless imitation of sheer terror. She shoved past Bradley and pointed a shaking, dramatic finger directly at my face. "Officers, thank God you are here. It is her, my daughter-in-law." Agent Cole stopped in the center of the room. He tilted his head slightly, observing the hysterical woman. "Ma'am, I need you to calm down and keep your hands visible." "How can I calm down?" Patricia cried out, her breathing heavy and erratic. "We have been living in absolute fear in our own home." She has been acting completely erratic for months. The late-night phone calls, the sudden unexplained cash, the aggressive behavior. We tried to get her help, but she refused. She is involved with dangerous people. I know she is. Bradley stepped forward, lowering his hands just a fraction, playing the role of the heartbroken, bewildered husband. He looked at me with an expression of profound manufactured betrayal. "Mother, please do not do this right now. We do not know what is happening. We need to protect Hannah." "No, Bradley, it is time to stop protecting her," Patricia yelled, turning her tear-streaked face back to Agent Cole. "She is destroying this family. I saw her sneaking in here late at night when she thought everyone was asleep. I saw her hiding things. Check the floorboards in this room. Right under that vintage rug. I know she buried something terrible down there." It was a breathtaking performance. She was handing me over on a silver platter, offering the FBI the exact location of the evidence while simultaneously painting herself as the vigilant, terrified matriarch. She was sealing my fate with absolute precision, ensuring the agents knew exactly where to look so there would be zero doubt about my guilt. Agent Cole looked at Patricia, his face completely unreadable. Then he looked at the Persian rug beneath my feet. He gave a short, sharp nod to the tactical team. "Pull it up," Cole commanded. Two heavily armed agents stepped forward. They grabbed the edges of the heavy wool rug and yanked it backward, exposing the polished oak floorboards. The room fell dead silent, save for the wailing sirens outside and the heavy breathing of my mother-in-law. Patricia gripped Bradley's arm, burying her face against his shoulder, as if she could not bear to watch the horror unfold. One of the agents produced a heavy steel pry bar from his tactical vest. He wedged it between the seams of the customized floorboards exactly where Patricia had indicated. With a sharp, violent crack, the wood splintered and gave way. He pulled back the false flooring, revealing a dark subterranean cavity. The agent reached down and pulled out the first item. It was a thick, vacuum-sealed brick of $100 bills. He tossed it onto the mahogany desk. It landed with a heavy, sickening thud. He reached down again and pulled out another brick, then another. He pulled out a leather-bound ledger detailing offshore wire transfers. He pulled out 3 separate pristine counterfeit passports. The sheer volume of illicit wealth and damning evidence piled onto the desk was staggering. The cartel money was finally seeing the light of day. Bradley stared at the mountain of cash and fake passports. He took a slow, stumbling step away from me. His face was a masterpiece of crushed, devastating disbelief. He shook his head, his eyes wide and watering as he looked at the damning evidence, and then back to me. "Hannah," Bradley whispered, his voice cracking perfectly on the syllables. "My God, how could you do this to us?" He was waiting for me to break. He was waiting for me to fall to my knees, sobbing and begging for mercy. He was waiting for me to scream that I had no idea how the money got there. He wanted the federal agents to see a hysterical, guilty woman backed into a corner, terrified of the prison sentence looming over her head. I looked at the mountain of dirty cash. I looked at the fake passports bearing aliases I had never used. I looked at Patricia, who was peeking over Bradley's shoulder, her eyes gleaming with malicious, absolute triumph. Finally, I looked directly into Bradley's eyes. I did not fall to my knees. I did not shed a single tear. I did not beg for my life or proclaim my innocence. Instead, I felt the muscles in my face shift. Slowly, deliberately, I let a wide, genuine smile spread across my face. My smile was not a gentle thing. It was a sharp, predatory curve that made Bradley physically recoil. For a decade, I had swallowed my pride, lowered my gaze, and allowed this man to dictate my reality. I had played the meek, obedient wife, while he and his mother treated my life like a disposable asset. But standing in the center of the shattered home office, illuminated by the violent strobing of federal police lights, I was finally taking the pen out of his hand. I was writing the final act. I broke eye contact with my husband and took 3 slow, deliberate steps backward. I moved away from the gaping hole in the oak floorboards and the mountain of vacuum-sealed cartel cash. Agent Cole watched me carefully, his hand resting near his holstered weapon, but he did not stop me. He knew I was unarmed. He knew I was the one who had given him the blueprint to this entire operation. I reached toward the polished mahogany credenza against the far wall. Resting beside a stack of unread architectural magazines was the sleek silver remote control for the smart home entertainment system. I picked it up. The metal felt cool and heavy against my palm. "What are you doing?" Patricia snapped, her voice shrill and trembling. Her eyes darted wildly between the federal agents, the cash, and my calm demeanor. "Officers, stop her. She is trying to destroy evidence." I did not look at her. I simply pressed the master power button and activated the screen mirroring function on my phone. Out in the main living room, the massive 85-inch OLED television flared to brilliant life. The screen was so large and centrally located that every single elite guest trapped in the grand foyer had a perfect, unobstructed view. The Vanguard Realty executives, the city council members, the wealthy investors, and their terrified wives all turned their attention to the glowing display. I pressed play. The hidden camera footage that Sylvia had risked everything to capture began to broadcast in pristine, high definition. The home theater surround sound system amplified the audio, pushing it into every corner of the house. The crisp, clear image on the screen showed the exact room we were currently standing in. But in the video, the floorboards were already pulled up and the room was empty of federal agents. Instead, the giant screen displayed Bradley and Patricia. A collective gasp rippled through the frozen crowd of party guests. In the video, Bradley was on his hands and knees, his bespoke suit jacket discarded on a nearby chair. He was grunting with effort as he violently shoved thick bricks of cash down into the dark cavity beneath the floor. Patricia was standing right beside him, holding the false oak floorboard ready to seal the trap. "Make sure the passports are pushed all the way to the back," Bradley commanded, his recorded voice booming from the ceiling speakers. The audio was flawless, capturing the absolute lack of remorse in his tone. "I need them hidden deep enough that she never finds them by accident, but shallow enough that the feds uncover them immediately during a raid." Patricia's recorded voice echoed next, sharp and impatient. "Just pack the money, Bradley. If Vanguard Realty goes under, we need Hannah to take the entire fall. The offshore accounts are already linked to her forged digital signature. When the FBI tears this house apart, they will see a woman planning to flee the country with stolen funds. We will be the heartbroken victims of a deceitful wife." In the center of the real home office, Bradley turned the color of ash. His handsome, charismatic face seemed to literally collapse in on itself. He stared at the massive television screen, watching his own towering hypocrisy being broadcast to the most powerful people in the city. The executives he had spent months courting, the politicians he had bribed, the investors he had charmed. They were all watching him carefully construct a federal crime. The federal agents in the room immediately shifted their stances. The assault rifles that had been pointed in my general direction swung entirely toward Bradley and Patricia. Agent Cole unholstered a pair of heavy steel handcuffs. the metallic clink sounding incredibly loud in the tense silence of the room. "Turn it off!" Patricia screamed. She broke away from Bradley and lunged toward the television, her hands waving frantically in the air as if she could physically wipe the image from the screen. She spun around to face the crowd of horrified onlookers, her chest heaving, her perfectly styled hair falling into her eyes. "It is a lie," she shrieked, her voice breaking into a hysterical screech. "You all know us. You know my son. He is a pillar of this community. That video is fake. It is a deep fake. She used artificial intelligence to generate that footage. She is trying to frame us because she knows she is guilty. Officers, you cannot believe a computer screen. Technology can make anyone look like a criminal these days. Look at the shadows. Look at the pixels. It is entirely manufactured." Her desperation was toxic. She was spiraling, grasping at any ridiculous excuse to save her crumbling empire. But the crowd was not buying it. The Vanguard executives were already backing away, creating a wide physical barrier between themselves and the disgraced family. The investors' wives were whispering behind their hands, their eyes filled with absolute disgust. The evidence was irrefutable. Patricia was wearing the exact same crimson pantsuit in the video that she was wearing right now, proving the footage had been recorded just hours before the party began. Bradley did not join his mother in her frantic denials. He knew it was over. He slowly turned his head to look at me. His arrogant swagger was completely gone, replaced by the hollow, empty stare of a man who realized he had just lost everything. "You ruined me," he whispered, his voice barely carrying over his mother's frantic screaming. "I saved myself," I replied, my voice cold and steady. Patricia was still raving, pointing her trembling finger at Agent Cole, demanding he arrest me for cybercrimes and digital manipulation. She was working herself into a frenzy, demanding someone step forward and vouch for their impeccable character. Then the crowd near the hallway parted. Terrence stepped out of the shadows. He did not look timid. He did not look like the browbeaten, subservient son-in-law he had played for the last decade. He walked directly into the center of the chaos, standing tall and resolute. In his right hand, he carried a massive, heavy cylindrical tube made of thick black plastic. It was the kind of industrial tube used by city planners and structural engineers. He stopped right next to Agent Cole, completely ignoring Patricia's hysterical ranting. He gripped the cap of the tube, preparing to twist it open. Terrence twisted the heavy plastic cap. It popped with a sharp suction sound that seemed to echo in the sudden silence of the room. He pulled out a thick, rolled sheet of heavy vellum architectural paper. He strode past Patricia, completely ignoring her frantic hyperventilating, and slammed the blueprints down onto the massive marble dining table situated just outside the study doors. He swept his large hands across the paper, smoothing it out flat under the bright chandelier light. Agent Cole stepped forward, his sharp eyes immediately dropping to the intricate grid of lines and structural notations. "My name is Terrence Vance." Terrence stated, his voice steady and vibrating with a booming authority that commanded absolute attention. "I am a certified city building inspector." Patricia stopped screaming. Bradley stopped breathing. Terrence pressed his thick index finger against a specific red-lined section of the floor plan. "Actually," Agent Terrence announced, projecting his voice so every single terrified elite guest in the foyer could hear him, "I can legally confirm that the 3-foot structural easement, where that cartel cash and those forged passports are currently hidden, does not belong to Hannah." He pulled a stapled stack of official city permits from his inside jacket pocket and dropped them right on top of the blueprint. According to these approved city zoning permits, Terrence continued tapping the documents. "This specific subterranean cavity was custom-built exactly 3 weeks ago. It is legally registered and insured entirely under the corporate umbrella of Vanguard Realty. That is Patricia's company. Hannah has zero legal ownership over that specific structural modification." The silence that followed was absolute. It was the sound of an empire collapsing into dust. The deepfake excuse was instantly dead. The physical, indisputable city blueprints proved that Patricia had personally authorized the creation of the exact hidden compartment where the federal evidence was just discovered. Patricia's face drained of all color, turning a sickly grayish white. Her carefully constructed high society mask, the one she had used to terrorize and belittle people for decades, completely shattered. She realized the trap had violently clamped shut, severing her leg. She was going to federal prison. Something inside her finally snapped. Patricia lunged. She threw herself at Terrence, her manicured hands curling into claws, aiming directly for his face. In her blind, panicked rage, her true, vile nature violently erupted. She began screaming racial slurs at him, her voice contorted into a mask of pure, ugly hatred. The words were so venomous, so deeply unforgivable, that they shocked the room like a physical blow. She spat the vile slurs repeatedly, her face twisted in a feral snarl, blaming him, blaming me, blaming everyone but her own boundless greed. The crowd of city elites recoiled in absolute horror. The investors who had praised her business acumen, the politicians who had accepted her campaign donations, the executives who had feared her, they all physically backed away. Disgust rippled across their faces. In a matter of seconds, Patricia had exposed herself not just as a criminal, but as a deeply repulsive bigot. Her reputation was permanently incinerated in front of the entire city. Two federal agents immediately tackled Patricia to the marble floor, pinning her arms behind her back as she continued to thrash and spit venom. Bradley stood frozen, watching his mother being restrained. He held his hands up, taking a slow, desperate step backward, trying to distance himself from the toxic meltdown. "I had nothing to do with this," Bradley stammered, his voice shaking. "Agent Cole, this is my mother's company. She authorized the floorboards. You heard the inspector. I am innocent." Agent Cole did not even blink. He raised his hand, signaling another tactical agent standing near the front doors. The agent walked forward, carrying Bradley's expensive custom monogrammed leather golf bag. He dropped it heavily onto the marble floor right at Bradley's feet. Agent Cole stepped over to the bag and unzipped the front side pocket. He reached inside and pulled out a cheap, thick plastic burner phone. He held it up by the corner enclosed in a clear plastic evidence bag. "Funny you should say that, Bradley," Agent Cole said, his voice dripping with icy contempt. "Because my cyber division just pulled the geolocation data on the encrypted text messages sent to those offshore cartel accounts. The ping originated directly from this exact burner phone, the same phone we just found tucked neatly inside your golf bag." Bradley stared at the plastic bag, his mouth opening and closing without any sound coming out. The net had caught him too. There was no escape. Agent Cole stepped right into Bradley's personal space. "Bradley and Patricia, you are both under arrest for money laundering, conspiracy to commit federal fraud, and the harboring of illicit cartel assets," Cole announced, his voice ringing with absolute finality. An agent stepped behind Bradley, grabbing his expensive velvet dinner jacket and roughly spinning him around. The heavy steel handcuffs clicked shut around Bradley's wrists with a sharp metallic snap. On the floor nearby, the agents hauled a sobbing, furious Patricia to her feet, the steel cuffs already locking her wrists together behind her back. I stood perfectly still, watching the federal agents march my husband and my mother-in-law toward the shattered front doors. I did not cry. I did not flinch. I simply let my smile widen, savoring the sweet, intoxicating taste of total victory. The federal agents jerked Bradley forward, forcing him to walk toward the shattered oak doors. The reality of the cold steel biting into his wrists finally shattered his carefully constructed delusion of invincibility. He thrashed against the two heavily armed men, gripping his biceps, his polished velvet jacket tearing at the seam. He dug the heels of his expensive Italian loafers into the marble floor, desperate to halt his march toward absolute ruin. He twisted his neck to look back at me. His face was a mask of pure, unadulterated venom. The charming husband routine was dead and buried. "You think you have won, Hannah!" He screamed, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings and silencing the murmurs of the terrified guests. "You think you can just hand me over and walk away with my life? I have power of attorney. You signed those papers. I control everything. I am draining your accounts tonight. I will leave you with absolutely nothing. You will be begging on the streets by tomorrow morning." The sheer audacity of his threat hung in the heavy air of the foyer. A few of the Vanguard Realty investors gasped, exchanging nervous glances. They knew Bradley's reputation for financial ruthlessness. They thought he was delivering a lethal parting shot from beyond the grave of his freedom. Agent Cole tightened his grip on Bradley's collar, preparing to drag him out, but I raised a single hand. Cole paused, giving me the floor. I walked slowly across the foyer, the emerald silk of my dress brushing against the polished stone. The crowd parted for me like the Red Sea. I stopped exactly 2 feet in front of my husband. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving with desperate rage, his eyes wild and bloodshot. I looked at him with a mixture of pity and absolute clinical detachment. "You really never paid attention to anything I did, Bradley," I said, my voice low and dangerously calm. "You spent 10 years treating me like a decorative accessory. You assumed I sat at home planning charity galas and arranging floral centerpieces because that is what your mother trained you to expect from a wife. You never bothered to look into my actual background before you married me." Bradley stopped struggling. A flicker of genuine confusion crossed his panicked features. "I am a forensic auditor, Brad," I stated, letting the words strike him like physical blows. I watched the color drain completely from his face as the realization hit him. A forensic auditor specializes in tracing illegal funds, unraveling complex financial fraud, and dismantling offshore shell companies. It was the exact opposite of the naive, submissive housewife he thought he had successfully manipulated. "I have spent the last 8 months mapping every single hidden account you and Patricia set up." I continued, my tone conversational but razor sharp. "Every shell corporation, every illicit wire transfer, every single dime of cartel money you funneled through Vanguard Realty. I tracked it all. And as for that power of attorney you forced me to sign." I smiled again, leaning slightly closer to him. "My personal family trust is biometrically locked. Your signature means absolutely nothing without my physical thumbprint and retinal scan. You never had access to a single cent of my money." Bradley's jaw trembled. He tried to speak, to formulate some kind of arrogant retort, but his brain was short-circuiting. The walls of his inescapable reality were closing in, crushing the breath out of his lungs. But I did not stop there. I wanted to break him down to the molecular level. I wanted to strip away every last illusion of control he harbored. "Let us talk about your money, Brad," I said, raising my voice slightly, so the silent crowd of investors could hear exactly what kind of man they had been doing business with. "Let us talk about the $5 million you tried to wire to the Cayman Islands at exactly 8 o'clock tonight. You thought you were being clever, setting up an automated transfer while the party was in full swing to act as your perfect alibi. You thought you were securing your golden parachute." Bradley's eyes widened in absolute terror. He knew exactly what transfer I was talking about. It was his ultimate fail-safe, the slush fund he and Patricia had bled from their own clients. "You did not factor in my administrative access to the primary servers," I whispered, stepping right into his personal space. "I intercepted that automated transfer at 7:59. I completely wiped your offshore routing numbers. I legally rerouted the entire $5 million back to the 40 families your firm scammed last year, the families you pushed into bankruptcy to inflate your own profit margins. The money is gone, Brad. It has already cleared their accounts. You are going to federal prison, and you are going there completely, utterly broke." The words landed with devastating finality. The last remaining pillar of his ego, his stolen wealth, was vaporized. Bradley's legs simply gave out. The structural integrity of his entire existence collapsed. He fell hard to his knees, his full body weight dropping toward the marble floor. The 2 federal agents had to tighten their grips on his arms just to keep his face from smashing into the stone. He hung there suspended between the agents, his head bowed, his chest heaving with dry, ragged sobs. He was a completely broken man, stripped of his power, his money, and his fake prestige. "Get him out of here," Agent Cole commanded, his voice laced with disgust. The agents dragged Bradley upright and hauled him through the doorway. Behind him, Patricia was thrashing violently against her captors. Her expensive heels scraped against the floor as she was physically carried out of the house. Her wails echoed down the front steps, no longer the composed queen of high society, but a desperate, raving criminal facing the end of her life. The heavy doors of the federal transport van slammed shut, cutting off her screams. The foyer was bathed in a heavy, stunned silence. The red and blue lights continued to flash across the walls, but the immediate threat was gone. The poison had been excised from the house. I turned away from the doorway and looked toward the back of the room. Megan was standing near the grand staircase. The champagne flute she had been holding was shattered on the floor beside her. She had both hands pressed over her mouth, her shoulders shaking violently as tears streamed down her cheeks. It was not the crying of a terrified woman. It was the overwhelming absolute release of a decade of suffocating tension. Terrence stepped up behind her. He dropped the empty blueprint tube onto a side table and wrapped his large, strong arms tightly around his wife. He pulled her back against his chest, burying his face in her hair. He kissed the top of her head, holding her with a fierce, protective love that Bradley could never comprehend. "It is over," Meg Terrence whispered, his deep voice carrying across the quiet room. "It is finally over. We are free from them. We are completely free." I stood in the center of the foyer, surrounded by the wreckage of the Vanguard Empire. I took a slow, deep breath, pulling the cool night air into my lungs. Terrence was right. The trap had sprung flawlessly, the toxic abusers were gone, and for the first time in my life I held the keys to my own kingdom. 6 months had passed since the flashing red and blue lights of the federal raid illuminated the Vanguard Realty estate. 6 months of relentless depositions, frozen bank accounts, and the systematic dismantling of a criminal empire. The heavy oak doors of the federal courtroom swung shut with a resounding thud that echoed through the cold marble corridor. I stood in the gallery, breathing the sterile, conditioned air of the courthouse, feeling lighter than I had in a decade. Inside the courtroom, Judge Harrison had just delivered the final verdict without a single shred of sympathy. He looked down from his elevated bench at the two disgraced architects of the Vanguard fraud. The prosecution had presented an ironclad case built entirely on the offshore routing data and biometric logs I had secured. The defense attorneys had attempted every trick in the book, trying to paint Bradley as a misguided son and Patricia as a naive widow. The judge saw right through the charade. He explicitly cited their complete lack of remorse and their highly calculated, premeditated attempts to pin the entire money laundering operation on me. Bradley received 15 years in federal prison with absolutely no possibility of early parole. When the sentence was read, his knees buckled. He grabbed the edge of the defense table, his knuckles turning white, his arrogant swagger entirely replaced by the hollow panic of a broken man. Patricia received 10 years. She had collapsed into her chair, weeping uncontrollably as the marshals moved in to restrain them. I walked out into the bright fluorescent light of the courthouse hallway, smoothing the skirt of my tailored navy suit. I heard the sharp metallic clinking of heavy chains before I saw her. 2 federal marshals were escorting Patricia toward the secure transport elevator. She was completely unrecognizable. The immaculate salon blowouts, the aggressive crimson designer pantsuits, and the heavy gold jewelry were gone. They were replaced by a shapeless, bright orange institutional jumpsuit. Her skin was sallow and deeply lined. Her posture slumped under the crushing weight of her new reality. Bradley had already been processed and removed through a different exit. Patricia saw me standing near the heavy glass doors. She stopped dead in her tracks, forcing the marshals to abruptly halt. She looked at me with wild, desperate eyes. The venom and superiority she had weaponized against me for 10 years had completely vanished. "Hannah, please," Patricia begged, her voice cracking into a pathetic, wet whimper that echoed down the empty corridor. "Please talk to the prosecutors. You know them. You worked with them. Tell them I was just following Bradley's lead. Tell them I am sick, and I did not understand the offshore accounts. I will give you whatever is left. I will give you the remaining commercial properties. Just do not let them put me in that cage, Hannah. Please." She reached her trembling, shackled hands toward me, the heavy steel chains rattling loudly against her waist. I stopped walking. I looked directly into the eyes of the woman who had spent 10 years trying to crush my spirit, isolate me, and steal my freedom. I looked at the woman who had happily planned to frame me for her own federal crimes and leave me rotting in a cell while she spent my money. I did not smile. I did not gloat. I did not deliver a dramatic monologue about karma or justice. I did not say a single word. I simply held my head high, turned my back to her, and walked away. Her hysterical sobbing echoed down the long marble hallway, fading into meaningless white noise, as I pushed through the heavy glass exit doors and stepped out into the bright, warm afternoon sun. The panoramic view of the city skyline sparkled through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my new downtown penthouse. It was my 34th birthday. The air was filled with soft jazz playing from the integrated sound system, and the genuine warm laughter of people I actually trusted. The space was sleek, modern, and entirely mine, bought and paid for with money I had earned and protected. Terrence stood by the white marble kitchen island pouring drinks. He looked incredibly relaxed and happy, having completely shed the timid, subservient persona he was forced to wear for years under Patricia's reign. Next to him, Megan was laughing at a joke he just made. She had officially cut all ties with her mother and brother, filing for a permanent protective order and taking full legal control of her own trust fund. She was finally healing, surrounded by a husband who genuinely loved her. Sylvia walked out onto the expansive private terrace, handing me a crystal flute of vintage champagne. After the Vanguard raid, she had officially accepted the position of lead investigator at my new firm. Vanguard Realty was a smoking crater of bankruptcies and federal seizures, but my career was just beginning. I was now the chief executive officer of my own elite forensic auditing agency, specializing exclusively in corporate fraud recovery and asset protection. The 40 families Bradley and Patricia had scammed were my first pro bono clients. I had successfully recovered and returned every single dime of their stolen investments. Word of my precise surgical takedown of the Vanguard empire had spread rapidly through the financial sector. My firm's client waiting list was already booked 2 years in advance. I stepped up to the glass railing of the terrace, looking out over the sprawling city that my ex-husband and his mother used to think they owned. The cool night wind caught my hair. Terrence, Megan, and Sylvia stepped up beside me, their faces glowing in the ambient city light. I held my champagne flute high, catching the reflection of the illuminated skyline below. I was not raising my glass to revenge. Revenge was a messy, exhausting emotion that tied you to the people who hurt you. I was raising my glass to something far more valuable. I clinked my glass against theirs, a sharp, clear ring of crystal cutting through the night air. I raised my glass to absolute, untouchable independence. The most powerful lesson from this journey is that true independence is the ultimate victory against toxic manipulation. For years, the protagonist endured abuse silently, underestimated as a mere accessory. Instead of fighting loud, pointless battles, she quietly leveraged her skills to meticulously dismantle their empire from the inside. Her triumph was not born from vengeance, but from a calculated dedication to truth and self-worth. It proves you do not need to shout to be heard. Your greatest weapon is silent resilience. Please share your own unique story of reclaiming personal power from a toxic family situation and comment below.